Rumor cascade. Someone posts a screenshot. No source, no context, just a claim alarming enough to share. Within minutes, it's in your group chat. A coworker mentions it over coffee. By evening, people are repeating it as fact, spreading details no one ever verified. This is a rumor cascade. Unverified information moving faster than anyone can fact-check it. It doesn't spread because it's true. It spreads because it feels urgent. Because it confirms what people already suspect. Because no one wants to be the last to know. Here's how it works. Someone shares a claim. The next person assumes someone else verified it. They pass it along. Each share adds perceived credibility, not from new evidence, but from repetition. The rumor doesn't need proof. It just needs momentum. Speed makes it dangerous. Fact-checking takes time. By the time a correction appears, the rumor has spread through thousands of conversations, been screenshot and reshared, taken on a life of its own. The correction never catches up. Think about workplaces. A rumor starts that layoffs are coming. No official word, just someone who, from someone, anxiety spreads. People update resumes, whisper in hallways, make decisions based on nothing confirmed. Leadership denies it later. Doesn't matter, the damage is done. Trust erodes. The rumor created its own reality. Or neighborhood apps. Someone posts about a suspicious person near the park. Hours later, the thread fills with similar sightings, each vaguer than the last. Details shift. Descriptions change. One unverified observation becomes neighborhood panic. Warnings to keep kids inside, avoid certain streets. No crime occurred. But the fear became real. The pattern repeats because cascades exploit how we process information. We assume if multiple people are talking about something, someone checked it. But in a cascade, everyone assumes someone else did the checking. No one actually verified it. Once a rumor hits critical mass, correction becomes impossible. People don't just reject facts. They double down. They've already repeated the claim to others. Admitting it was false means admitting they spread misinformation. So they find reasons to keep believing, even when evidence contradicts them. Rumor cascades don't need conspiracy. They don't need coordination. Just enough people making the same assumption someone, somewhere verified this before it got this far. But no one did. By the time anyone checks, it's too late. Gossip. A friend pulls you aside, lowers their voice. Did you hear what happened with Sarah? The story is second-hand, maybe third-hand. Detailed enough to feel real. You don't know if it's true. By end of day, you've mentioned it to someone else. Not to spread rumors, just because it came up. Gossip isn't random chatter. It's a social tool. It establishes who's in, who's out, what behavior gets punished. People share information about others not to inform, but to bond, to signal alignment, to enforce rules without direct confrontation. When you share gossip, you create a shared secret. That builds trust, or at least the feeling of it. You're not just exchanging information. You're establishing you're on the same side, seeing the world the same way. It's social currency. The more you know, the more connected you are. The more you share, the more valuable you become. Gossip also works as a reputation system. Where formal accountability is weak, gossip fills the gap. Someone breaks an unwritten rule, may be unreliable at work or difficult in relationships. Information spreads quietly. No official reprimand. The damage to their reputation does the work. People become cautious. Opportunities dry up, all from conversations behind closed doors. But here's the problem. Gossip doesn't require accuracy, just plausibility. A story doesn't need fact-checking if it aligns with what people already believe about the target. Someone has a reputation for being difficult. Any story confirming that spreads easily, even if details are exaggerated or false. Office dynamics. Someone misses a deadline. Word spreads they're not pulling their weight. The story grows. People attribute other failures to them, things they had nothing to do with. Colleagues distance themselves. Managers take note. The original deadline might have had a legitimate reason. Doesn't matter. The narrative is set. They're the unreliable one. The gossip network decided. Social circles. Someone ends a relationship. Gossip starts immediately. I heard she cheated. He was always controlling. Accounts contradict each other. Each group latches onto the version fitting their loyalty. Truth becomes irrelevant. What matters is which story your group accepts. That determines who gets sympathy, who gets frozen out. The mechanism reinforces itself. Once gossip establishes someone's reputation, it filters future information. Ambiguous behavior gets interpreted through that lens. A neutral comment becomes evidence of character. A minor mistake becomes proof of a pattern. The gossip didn't just spread information. It created a framework shaping how every future interaction is perceived. And because gossip happens in private, defending against it is nearly impossible. You can't refute claims you never hear. By the time damage is visible, the conversations causing it are over. Denying gossip often makes it worse. Now you're defensive, can't handle criticism. The gossip wins either way. Gossip operates as informal enforcement, punishes deviation, rewards conformity, builds coalitions without stating rules out loud. It spreads not because people are malicious, but because sharing information about others is one of the oldest ways humans build and maintain social structures. Even when the information is incomplete. Even when it's wrong. Social contagion. You weren't planning to buy anything. Then someone at the table orders dessert. Suddenly everyone's ordering dessert. Not because you're all craving sweets, because the first order made it acceptable, then expected. By the third person, not ordering feels awkward. Emotions and behaviors spread between people like viruses. Not through conscious decision, but through automatic mimicry and social pressure. You mirror the mood around you without realizing it. Someone laughs, you smile. Someone panics, your pulse quickens. The transmission happens faster than thought. This is social contagion, the process where feelings and actions ripple through groups without anyone deliberately spreading them. It doesn't require persuasion, just proximity and repetition. Watch someone yawn, you yawn. Hear anxiety in their voice, tension creeps into yours. The brain treats observed behavior as instruction. The effect compounds in groups. One person's anxiety becomes the room's anxiety. One person's excitement becomes collective energy. The shift happens so smoothly most people don't notice they've changed. They think their reaction is independent. But put them in a different group, different behaviors emerge. Workplaces run on this. One person starts checking their phone during meetings. Within weeks, half the room is doing it. No announcement. No permission. Just observation and imitation. The behavior becomes normal because it became common. Once enough people do something, resistance feels like the deviation. Or consider how emotions spread in friend groups. One person vents about a frustration. The mood darkens. Others start sharing their own complaints, each one feeding the next. What started as one person having a bad day becomes a collective narrative that everything's falling apart. The contagion didn't just spread the mood. It amplified it. Online, the effect accelerates. Someone posts outrage, the thread fills with more outrage. Each comment validates the last, raising the emotional temperature. What might have been mild irritation alone becomes collective fury in a feed. The contagion doesn't just transmit feeling. It intensifies it through confirmation. The mechanism is ancient. Humans survived by reading and matching the emotions of their group. Fear in others signals danger. Calm in others signals safety. The instinct to sync up happens below conscious control. By the time you realize you've caught the mood, you're already acting on it. Social contagion doesn't care about logic. It doesn't care if the behavior makes sense. It only cares about visibility and repetition. The more you see something, the more normal it feels. the more normal it feels, the more likely you are to do it yourself. And once you do, you become the transmission vector for someone else. Moral panic. A few incidents, unrelated, maybe even coincidental, but the headlines make them seem like a pattern, a trend, a threat sweeping the nation. Suddenly everyone's talking about it. Parents are worried. Experts are warning. Calls for action multiply. The danger feels imminent, overwhelming everywhere. Then months later, the data comes out. The threat was exaggerated, sometimes non-existent. The panic did more damage than the original problem. But by then, policies have changed, reputations have been destroyed, and fear has embedded itself into public consciousness. The correction barely registers. This is moral panic, a collective overreaction to a perceived threat, often targeting a specific group or behavior. It doesn't start with facts. It starts with fear, amplified by media attention and social pressure until the response becomes disproportionate to the actual risk. The formula is predictable. First, something unusual happens. A crime, a trend, a cultural shift. Media coverage frames it as dangerous, especially to children or traditional values. The framing isn't neutral. It's designed to alarm. Headlines emphasize threat. Stories highlight worst-case scenarios. Context gets dropped in favor of urgency. Next, authority figures validate the concern. Experts are brought in not to assess risk accurately, but to confirm it exists. Politicians call for legislation. Community leaders demand action. The validation creates a feedback loop. The more people take it seriously, the more serious it seems. Then comes the scapegoating. The panic needs a target, a group, a subculture, a behavior. The target becomes the embodiment of the threat. Not just participants in a trend, but dangers to society. Nuance disappears. Anyone associated with the target gets painted with the same brush. Defense becomes evidence of complicity. Think about how quickly this escalates. A few teenagers get sick from a new party trend. Within weeks, it's a national crisis. Schools send warnings. News segments run nightly. Parents monitor every activity. The actual number of incidents might be tiny, but the fear makes it feel epidemic. Policies get implemented. Funding gets redirected. All based on perception, not proportion. Or how subcultures get demonized. A music genre, a fashion style, a gaming community. A handful of negative incidents get amplified until the entire group is seen as corrupting youth. The panic doesn't distinguish between participation and pathology. Enjoying the music becomes gateway behavior. Wearing the clothes becomes a red flag. Association alone becomes suspect. The damage outlasts the panic. Even after evidence shows the threat was minimal, the fear persists. People remember the alarm, not the retraction. The policies enacted during the panic stay in place. The stigma attached to the target group lingers. The panic reshapes reality, then disappears, leaving the consequences behind. Moral panics thrive on urgency. The faster the response, the less time for evaluation. By the time rational analysis catches up, the panic has already done its work. The threat was never as big as it seemed. But the reaction was real and the damage was lasting. Pluralistic ignorance. Everyone's sitting in the meeting. The proposal doesn't make sense. The numbers don't add up. The timeline is impossible. But no one speaks up. You glance around. Everyone looks calm, nodding along. Maybe you're the only one who doesn't get it. Maybe you're missing something obvious. So you stay quiet too. Weeks later, the project collapses. Turns out everyone had doubts. Everyone saw the problems. But each person stayed silent because they thought they were the only one. The group made a collective decision no individual actually supported. This is pluralistic ignorance, the phenomenon where everyone privately rejects something but publicly goes along with it because they believe everyone else accepts it. It's not about lacking information. It's about misreading the group. You think you're the outlier when you're actually the majority. The mechanism is simple but powerful. People don't just observe behavior, they interpret it. Silence gets read as agreement. Compliance gets read as approval. When everyone's faking consensus, the fake consensus looks real. And because it looks real, no one challenges it. It plays out everywhere. College students overestimate how much their peers drink because the loud minority is visible and the moderate majority stays quiet. Everyone assumes everyone else is comfortable with the drinking culture, so they participate beyond their actual preference. The behavior persists not because people want it, but because they think others want it. Or workplace cultures where everyone's overworked, but no one admits it. People see colleagues staying late, assume they're dedicated rather than struggling, and push themselves to match. Each person thinks they're the only one barely keeping up. So they hide the difficulty, which makes the next person hide theirs. The cycle feeds itself. The culture becomes unsustainable, maintained entirely by misperception. Social norms operate the same way. A community might privately disagree with a tradition, but publicly uphold it because they believe everyone else values it. No one wants to be the first to break from the group. So the tradition continues, supported by people who would happily abandon it if they knew others felt the same. The silence isn't passive. It's strategic. Speaking up risks looking foolish, difficult, out of touch. Staying quiet protects your standing. But when everyone makes that calculation, the group locks itself into decisions no one actually wants. The shared fiction becomes shared reality. Breaking pluralistic ignorance requires someone willing to voice the private doubt publicly. But that's risky. If you're wrong about the group, you're isolated. If you're right, you're the troublemaker who broke the comfortable silence. Either way, there's a cost. So most people wait for someone else to go first. The irony is brutal. The thing everyone's going along with might be the thing everyone privately opposes. But because everyone's waiting for a signal that it's safe to dissent, the signal never comes. The group chooses a path no individual would choose, and everyone thinks they're the only one who notices. Illusory truth effect. You've heard it before. Not sure where. Maybe a headline, maybe a conversation, maybe just scrolling past it online. The claim sounded off at first, but you keep seeing it. Different sources, same message. After the third or fourth time, it stops feeling strange. It starts feeling familiar. And familiar starts feeling true. This is the illusory truth effect. Repetition makes statements feel more credible, even when they're false, even when you don't remember where you heard them. The brain mistakes familiarity for accuracy. You're not choosing to believe it. Your mind is just processing the ease of recognition as a signal of validity. The effect works because of how memory operates. When you encounter information repeatedly, it becomes easier to process. That ease registers as fluency, and fluency feels like truth. The claim doesn't need evidence. It just needs exposure. Enough repetition, and even obvious falsehoods start feeling plausible. Advertising has always known this. A slogan doesn't persuade through logic. It persuades through repetition. Hear it enough times and it burrows in. You don't necessarily agree with the claim, but it feels less foreign, less questionable. The resistance fades not because you were convinced, but because the statement became familiar. But the effect becomes dangerous when applied to facts. Misinformation repeated across platforms by different voices with slight variations. Each repetition strengthens the illusion. You might fact-check it the first time and find it false. But by the 10th exposure, the checking feels less necessary. The claim has become part of the landscape. Your brain stops flagging it as suspicious. Political messaging exploits this ruthlessly. A false claim gets repeated in speeches, interviews, social media posts, supporter conversations. The claim itself doesn't change, but the sheer volume of exposure wears down skepticism. Even people who know better start second-guessing. I keep hearing this. Maybe there's something to it. There isn't. There's just repetition. Online environments amplify the effect. The same claim circulates through multiple feeds, multiple formats, multiple presenters. Each appearance feels like independent confirmation, but it's just the same information looping. The illusion of consensus builds not from agreement, but from repackaging. One source becomes 10, and 10 feels like corroboration. The worst part, you don't need to believe the claim for it to influence you. Repeated exposure affects judgment, even when you consciously reject the information. The brain still processes the fluency, still registers the familiarity. The claim becomes easier to accept later, even if you dismissed it initially. Repetition doesn't just make lies feel true. It makes resistance harder over time. The mechanism is automatic. You can't stop fluency from registering. You can't turn off the brain's tendency to equate ease with accuracy. The only defense is awareness. Recognize that familiarity isn't evidence. Recognize that comfort with a claim doesn't validate it. Because if something's been repeated enough times, your brain will start treating it as plausible whether you want it to or not. Repetition effect. The jingle plays. Again, you weren't paying attention the first time, barely noticed the second, but by the 10th, it's stuck. You find yourself humming it without thinking. The brand name surfaces when you're shopping, not because you decided it's better, just because it's there, in your head waiting. Repetition doesn't persuade, it embeds. The brain doesn't evaluate truth or quality after enough exposures. It just recognizes. And recognition feels like preference. You're not choosing the product because you researched it. You're choosing it because the name came to mind first, and what comes to mind first feels right. This is the repetition effect. Exposure alone creates preference, bypasses evaluation, turns neutral items into familiar ones. Familiarity doesn't prove value, but the mind treats it like it does. The more you encounter something, the more your brain interprets that frequency as importance. Not because it matters, but because it keeps appearing. The effect operates below conscious choice. You don't think, I've seen this brand 10 times, so I'll buy it. You just reach for it. The decision feels spontaneous. But it's been shaped by accumulation. Each exposure was dismissed as insignificant, but the total changed your baseline. What was once unknown became normal. What was normal became preferred. Advertising knows this. A campaign doesn't need to convince. It needs to appear, over and over. Different context, same message. The goal isn't agreement. It's saturation. Get the name into enough spaces, and it becomes the default option. Not the best option. Just the one that surfaces first when the choice arrives. Political slogans operate the same way. A phrase repeated across rallies, interviews, social media, supporter signs. The content might be hollow. Doesn't matter. Repetition makes it memorable, and memorable feels significant. By the 100th exposure, the slogan sounds like common sense, even if it never had substance. Think about songs you dislike. First listen, you skip it. Second time, still annoying, but it's on the radio constantly. Weeks later, you're not skipping anymore. You might not love it, but it's lost its abrasiveness. The repetition wore down resistance. The song didn't improve. Your tolerance just adapted to the frequency, or products you never wanted, and it runs during every show. At first, you ignore it. Then you notice it. Then you stop noticing it consciously, but the brand is lodged. Months later, you're choosing between options at a store. The repeated brand feels safer, more established, more reliable. None of that came from research. It came from exposure. The mechanism is efficient. The brain conserves energy by marking frequently encountered information as relevant. Repetition signals this matters without requiring proof. Each encounter reinforces the mark. After enough cycles, the information integrates into your mental landscape. It's not something you learn. It's something that became part of the environment. The effect doesn't distinguish between quality and frequency. A lie repeated enough times competes with truth. A weak idea repeated constantly competes with strong ones. The brain's filter isn't accuracy, it's exposure. And in that competition, repetition often wins. Third-person effect. You see the ad. Flashy, manipulative, obviously designed to sell. You recognize the tactic. You're not falling for it. But the ad keeps running because someone must be. Other people. The ones who don't see through it like you do. Except you bought the product last week. This is the third-person effect. The belief that media influence works on others but not on you. Everyone thinks they're the exception. Everyone assumes they're more resistant, more critical, less susceptible than the average person. And because everyone thinks that, no one admits when it works. The psychology is self-protective. Admitting susceptibility feels like admitting weakness. So the mind separates itself from the crowd. You're informed. You're skeptical. You see the tricks. Those other people, the ones buying into it, they're different. They're less aware. The influence works on them, not you. But influence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like being manipulated. It feels like preference, like choice, like arriving at a conclusion independently. You're not aware of the ad's effect when you choose the brand. You just remember the name. You just feel a vague sense of trust. The mechanism hid itself behind familiarity. Watch how this plays out with political messaging. You see a biased news segment. You recognize the spin. You tell yourself you're filtering it, taking only the facts, discarding the manipulation. You're confident the framing didn't touch you. But weeks later, you're repeating the exact talking points you thought you dismissed. They didn't feel imposed. They felt like your own reasoning. The third-person effect made you blind to the absorption. Or consider advertising. You laugh at commercials. You mock the obvious emotional appeals. You're certain you're immune, but your purchasing habits show otherwise. The brands you reach for are the ones you've seen most. The products you trust are the ones advertised most aggressively. You didn't decide they're superior. You decided you're not influenced. Those are different claims, and only one is true. The effect extends to news consumption. You read articles from sources you know are biased. You tell yourself you're extracting facts, filtering bias, thinking critically. But research shows people underestimate how much framing shapes interpretation. You think you're getting objective information because you're aware of the slant. Awareness doesn't neutralize influence. It just makes you feel safe while the influence operates. Social media platforms exploit this constantly. You see targeted ads, algorithm-curated feeds, engagement-optimized content. You know it's designed to manipulate behavior. You feel sophisticated for recognizing it. But you're still scrolling, still clicking, still sharing content the algorithm surfaced. The awareness didn't protect you. It just made you more comfortable while the system shaped your attention. The danger is the confidence. If you believe you're immune, you stop monitoring your own reactions. You stop questioning whether that preference, that belief, that choice was actually independent. The third-person effect doesn't just make you vulnerable to influence. It makes you certain you're not vulnerable, which removes the last defense you had. Everyone thinks the influence is working on someone else. And because everyone thinks that the influence works on everyone. Social proof. You're standing in an unfamiliar city. 2 restaurants side by side. One's empty. The other has a line out the door. You don't know either place. You don't have recommendations. But you join the line. Not because you researched the menu. Because the crowd made the choice for you. Social proof is the shortcut. When you're uncertain, you look at what others are doing and assume they know something you don't. It's not conscious reasoning. It's automatic pattern matching. Large group equals good choice. Empty space equals risk. The logic never gets examined. The crowd becomes the evidence. This is how decisions get outsourced. You're not evaluating quality. You're counting heads. The assumption is that collective behavior reflects collective knowledge. But most of the people in that line made the same assumption you did. They saw a crowd and joined. No one verified the food is actually good. The crowd became self-reinforcing proof. The mechanism works everywhere. You're watching videos online. 2 options, same topic. One has 1 million views. The other has 1,000. You click the 1,000,000. Not because you assessed content quality. Because popularity signals value. The number told you what to choose before you watched a second of either. Or product reviews. You're comparing items. One has 500 ratings. One has 10. Even if the 10 are all 5 stars and the 500 average lower, you lean toward the 500. More reviews feels like more validation. The crowd size outweighs the actual assessment. Social proof isn't about quality. It's about quantity. Uncertainty amplifies the effect. The less you know, the more you rely on what others are doing. You're in a new city, walking past street performers. One has a crowd gathered. One has nobody. You stop at the crowd. Not because you verified they're more talented, because their audience made them look worth watching. The crowd created its own justification. Think about trends. A product starts selling. Early buyers are random, but once it reaches a certain threshold, sales accelerate. Not because the product improved, because visibility increased. People see others using it and assume it's good. Each purchase validates the next. The trend becomes proof of value, even when the value hasn't changed. Or panic. A fire alarm goes off. People don't immediately evacuate. They look around. If others are calm, they stay calm. If others start running, they run. The crowd's reaction becomes your threat assessment. You're not evaluating danger independently. You're reading the room. And if the room is wrong, you're wrong with them. The tragedy is how often the crowd is following the crowd. Nobody did the research. Nobody verified the claim. But because everyone else is acting like they know, you assume someone must. The chain of assumption never touches actual knowledge. It just loops through collective behavior, pretending to be collective wisdom. Social proof doesn't require accuracy. It just requires visibility. Show enough people doing something, and it starts looking correct. Not because it is, but because the numbers created the illusion of consensus. And once that illusion forms, it guides decisions as effectively as truth. Bandwagon Effect. Why does everyone suddenly care about something nobody mentioned last month? Because enough people started caring that not caring became the outlier position. The topic didn't get more important. It got more visible, and visibility converts into momentum faster than quality ever could. The bandwagon effect is the shift from "some people believe this" to "everyone believes this," without the underlying facts changing. It's pure social acceleration. Once a critical mass forms, joining feels natural and resisting feels contrarian. The content of the belief becomes secondary to the fact that it's spreading. It starts quietly. A few early adopters. Their support is genuine, based on evaluation. But once the movement hits visibility, the dynamic changes. New joiners aren't evaluating. They're responding to growth. The bandwagon isn't moving because it's right. It's moving because it's moving. And movement attracts more movement. Watch how this plays in elections. A candidate starts polling well. Media covers the rise. The coverage creates more visibility. Visibility attracts undecided voters who want to back a winner. Their support boosts the polls further. The cycle feeds itself. The candidate didn't necessarily improve their platform. They just crossed the threshold where momentum became self-sustaining. Or fashion trends. A style appears. A few influencers wear it. Suddenly it's everywhere. Not because everyone independently decided it looks good. Because wearing it signals you're current. Not wearing it signals you're behind. The trend's content matters less than its adoption rate. You're not choosing the style. You're choosing to stay aligned with the moving target of what's normal. Consumer behavior runs on this. A product becomes popular. Sales surge. The surge gets reported. The reporting drives more sales. People buy not because they need it, but because everyone else is buying it. The fear isn't missing out on the product. It's missing out on the shared experience. Being outside the trend feels like being left behind. Think about investment bubbles. An asset price rises. Early investors profit. Others see the gains and jump in. Their buying pushes the price higher. More people notice. More people buy. The fundamentals haven't changed, but the bandwagon creates its own reality. Everyone's buying because everyone's buying, until it stops. And when it stops, the reversal is just as fast. Or outrage cycles. A controversy emerges. A few voices condemn it. The condemnation spreads. More people join, not because they assess the issue deeply, but because the outrage is visible. Joining feels like solidarity. Silence feels like complicity. The bandwagon doesn't ask for analysis. It asks for allegiance. And the speed of adoption punishes hesitation. The mechanism doesn't care about truth. It cares about velocity. A false claim on a fast-moving bandwagon beats a true claim on a slow one. The brain registers momentum as validation. If this many people believe it, it must have merit. But the numbers reflect spread, not verification. The bandwagon grew because it grew, not because it earned growth. And once you're on, getting off looks like betrayal. The bandwagon creates in-group identity. Membership feels like belonging. Leaving feels like abandoning your people. The belief becomes secondary to the group. You're not defending an idea. You're defending your place in the movement. And the movement doesn't tolerate exits gracefully. Panic buying psychology. The shelves are empty. You didn't come for toilet paper. You came for milk. But seeing the empty shelves trips something. If everyone else is stocking up, maybe you should too. You grab more than you need. Not because you reasoned through a supply shortage. Because scarcity triggered urgency, and urgency shut down calculation. Panic buying isn't about actual shortage. It's about perceived shortage. And once perception spreads, it creates the reality it feared. Shelves empty not because supply collapsed, but because fear of supply collapse made everyone buy at once. The panic manufactures its own evidence. The psychology is visceral. Scarcity signals threat. Threat activates survival instinct. The rational part of your brain, the part that knows the supply chain is fine, gets overridden by the part that sees empty shelves and screams. Get yours now. You're not thinking about whether you need 3 months of supplies. You're thinking about what happens if you don't grab them and everyone else does. It compounds in groups. You see someone with a full cart, then another. The volume of buying signals danger. If they know something you don't, you're behind. You start filling your own cart. Not because you planned to. Because social proof turned buying into defensive behavior. The crowd's panic became your panic, without anyone confirming the threat was real. Media coverage accelerates it. A story runs about shortages. The story triggers buying. The buying creates actual shortages. The actual shortages confirm the story. The loop tightens. What started as a warning became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The shortage wasn't inevitable. It was created by the collective response to the warning. Think about gas shortages. A pipeline has a minor issue. News reports potential disruptions. People rush to fill tanks. Stations run out because demand spiked, not because supply failed. The empty pumps confirm everyone's fear. More people panic. The shortage that was predicted becomes real, not from the pipeline, but from the reaction to the prediction. Or bank runs. A rumor spreads that a bank might fail. Depositors rush to withdraw. The withdrawals strain the bank's liquidity. The strain makes failure more likely. The bank collapses not because it was insolvent, but because the fear of insolvency created the conditions for insolvency. The panic didn't respond to reality. It created reality. The mechanism doesn't require real threat. It just requires belief in threat. Once enough people act on the belief, their actions generate evidence that justifies more action. The empty shelf wasn't proof of shortage. It was proof of panic. But panic and shortage look identical in the moment, so the cycle continues. And once it starts, stopping it is nearly impossible. Telling people there's no shortage doesn't work when they're staring at empty shelves. The visual evidence beats the verbal reassurance. They see scarcity. That scarcity is real, even if it's artificially created. So they keep buying. The panic feeds itself until the thing everyone feared actually happens, brought into existence entirely by the fear. Mass hysteria. A few students report feeling dizzy. Within hours, dozens are hospitalized. Tests come back clean. No toxins, no contaminants, no physical cause. But the symptoms were real. The students weren't faking. Their bodies responded to a threat that didn't exist outside their collective belief that it did. Mass hysteria is when psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms, spreading through a group until the illness becomes real without a biological source. It's not delusion. The symptoms are genuine. The cause is social contagion, not infection. Fear created the outbreak. It follows a pattern. An initial incident, often minor. Someone faints, someone smells something strange, someone feels unwell. The incident gets attention. Others start monitoring their own bodies for similar symptoms. Anxiety sharpens perception. Normal sensations, usually ignored, suddenly register as significant. A slight headache becomes evidence. A moment of nausea becomes confirmation. The spread is rapid. One person's symptoms validate another's. I feel it too reinforces the reality of the threat. Each new case amplifies the fear. Soon, the entire group is caught in a feedback loop where belief in the illness produces the symptoms that confirm the illness exists. Historical cases are stark. Factory workers convinced gas was leaking, all developing respiratory symptoms, despite air quality tests showing nothing. School students convinced they'd been poisoned, experiencing vomiting and dizziness with no toxicological evidence. The symptoms were psychosomatic, but that didn't make them less real to the people experiencing them. The conditions are specific: high-stress environments, close-knit groups, ambiguous initial trigger, authority figures struggling to explain what's happening. The combination creates fertile ground. People are primed to expect threat. The group provides social proof. The ambiguity prevents easy dismissal. The lack of clear answers from authorities leaves space for fear to fill. Think about how this plays out. A student smells something odd. She mentions it. Others start sniffing. Someone else says they smell it too. A third person feels lightheaded. The teacher calls the nurse. The nurse finds nothing wrong but sends them home as a precaution. Ward spreads. By the next day, more students report symptoms. The school investigates. Tests find nothing. But the symptoms continue. Because the threat isn't in the air, it's in the shared belief. Or consider workplace outbreaks. A rumor starts that the building has mold. One person coughs. Then another. Soon, multiple people are reporting respiratory issues. Environmental tests come back negative. But the symptoms persist. The belief in mold created the experience of mold exposure. The group's conviction made the illness real, even though the cause wasn't. The mechanism is the brain's tendency to interpret ambiguous signals as dangerous when fear is present. Your body always has minor sensations. Fatigue, aches, dizziness, nausea. Normally, you ignore them. But if you're told there might be a threat, you start interpreting those sensations as symptoms. The interpretation triggers stress. Stress produces more physical sensations. The cycle reinforces itself. And because everyone's experiencing it together, validation is constant. You're not imagining things. Other people feel it too. The collective experience becomes proof. By the time authorities declare there's no danger, the group has already created its own evidence. The symptoms were real. The cause was psychological. But psychological doesn't mean fake. It means the mind created what the environment didn't provide. Mass hysteria doesn't happen because people are irrational. It happens because people are social. They trust their group's perception. They mirror their group's responses. And when a group collectively interprets a threat, the body follows the mind's lead. The illness spreads not through air or water, but through belief. And belief, when shared, becomes as contagious as any virus. Viral misinformation. A post goes up. Screenshot of a headline, no link. The claim sounds outrageous enough to be true. Within an hour, it's been shared thousands of times. Reactions pile up. Anger, shock, disbelief. By the time someone checks the source, the post has already embedded itself in thousands of feeds. The correction gets a fraction of the attention. The lie has won. Viral misinformation doesn't spread because it's convincing. It spreads because it triggers emotion before reason can catch up. Outrage, fear, validation. The feelings make the claim shareable. Accuracy becomes irrelevant. The emotional reaction is the fuel. The faster it burns, the wider it spreads. The structure is engineered for velocity. Short, shocking, designed to provoke. No need for context or nuance. Those slow sharing down. The claim has to hit hard and fast. Make people feel something strong enough that they share before they think. Once the emotion fires, the share button is already pressed. Platforms amplify this by design. Algorithms prioritize engagement. Engagement means clicks, comments, shares. Misinformation generates massive engagement because it's emotionally charged. The algorithm doesn't evaluate truth. It evaluates activity. A false claim that gets people riled up beats a true claim that gets a nod and a scroll. The system rewards the lie. Watch how it moves. Someone shares the false post. Their followers see it. A few share without checking. Their networks see it. The chain multiplies. Each share adds legitimacy. If this many people are sharing it, there must be something to it. The volume creates the illusion of verification. But nobody verified. They just forwarded the emotion. Think about political misinformation. A fake quote attributed to a public figure. It confirms what people already believe about them. The quote spreads instantly. Supporters share it as evidence. Opponents share it as outrage. Both sides amplify it. The fact that it's fabricated barely slows it down. By the time fact-checkers flag it, millions have seen it. The retraction reeks thousands. The damage is permanent. Or health misinformation. A false cure, a fake danger, a distorted statistic. It plays on fear. People share it to warn others, to help, to spread what they think is critical information. The intent is good. The effect is harmful. The misinformation rides on concern, moving faster than any correction because corrections don't generate the same emotional urgency. The speed is the weapon. Truth requires verification. Verification takes time. Misinformation doesn't wait. It moves on instinct and emotion. By the time the truth assembles its evidence, the lie has already circled the platform multiple times, lodged in minds, shaped opinions, influenced decisions. And once it's viral, killing it is nearly impossible. You can't unshare it from every feed. You can't reverse the impression it left. The correction might get seen, but the original claim is what stuck. The first version always has the advantage. It arrived when attention was fresh. The correction arrives when people have already moved on. Viral misinformation doesn't need to be sophisticated. It just needs to be fast and emotionally potent. The platforms built for speed give it the perfect environment. The human brain built for quick reactions gives it the perfect host. And the combination makes lies travel faster than truth ever could. Fear appeal spread. They tell you it's coming. The threat is real. Experts are worried. The evidence is mounting. You need to act now before it's too late. The warning lands. Your pulse quickens. You forward the message. You're not spreading panic. You're spreading awareness. Except the threat was exaggerated, sometimes fabricated, and the fear just made it grow. Fear appeal spread is the tactic of using threat to drive action. The mechanism is simple. Scare people enough, and they'll share the warning without checking it. Fear bypasses skepticism. It triggers urgency. And urgency makes verification feel like a dangerous delay. Better to share now and be wrong than wait and be too late. The formula works because fear is contagious. You read the warning. Your brain interprets threat. That interpretation leaks into your behavior. You share it. The person who sees your share experiences the same spike. Their brain doesn't evaluate the claim's accuracy. It evaluates the emotional signal. Fear says, important. Important says, share. The chain continues. Watch how this plays out with health scares. A new danger emerges. The message spreads. This ingredient causes disease. Stop using it immediately. The claim is based on a misread study or no study at all. But it sounds credible. It taps into existing anxiety about safety. People share it to protect their networks. The sharing looks like care. The result is mass panic over nothing. Or environmental threats. This area will be uninhabitable in 5 years. The timeline creates urgency. The specificity makes it feel researched. The claim spreads. People make decisions based on it. Move, sell, prepare. Later, the prediction fails. But the fear already reshaped behavior. The correction doesn't undo the choices people made under the influence of the original threat. Think about how fear spreads in communities. A warning about a local danger. Crime, contamination, safety, risk. The warning circulates. Parents keep kids inside. Businesses see foot traffic drop. Property values dip. Investigations find no basis for the threat. But the fear has already done economic and social damage. The community reacted to perception, not reality. And perception, once spread, is hard to reverse. The tactic is ruthless in politics. If they win, this will happen. The threat is vague but visceral. Loss of rights, economic collapse, societal breakdown. The fear doesn't need evidence. It just needs to feel plausible. Once planted, it motivates. People vote against the threat, not for a policy. They're not choosing a candidate. They're avoiding the catastrophe they were told to fear. Fear appeal works because the brain prioritizes threat detection. False positives, seeing danger where there is none, are survivable. False negatives, missing real danger, are fatal. So the mind errs on the side of caution. Better to react to a false alarm than ignore a real one. The mechanism kept humans alive. Now it keeps misinformation alive. The spread doesn't require malice. People sharing fear appeals often believe they're helping. Warning others feels responsible. But responsibility without verification just amplifies the fear. Each share validates the threat. Each validation makes the next person more likely to share. The fear becomes self-sustaining, powered by good intentions and bad information. And once fear embeds, dislodging it is brutal. Telling people the threat wasn't real triggers defensiveness. They shared it. They acted on it. Admitting it was false means admitting they were manipulated. Easier to find reasons to keep believing than to accept the fear was manufactured. The appeal doesn't just spread fear. It creates investment in the fear's validity. An invested fear is fear that lasts. Outrage Contagion. Someone does something objectionable. The post goes viral, not just disagreement. Outrage. Comments flood in, each more furious than the last. People who weren't even affected join the pile-on. The anger spreads faster than the original incident, feeding on itself until the collective fury far exceeds the scale of the offense. Outrage Contagion is the amplification of anger through social networks. It doesn't start with calm evaluation. It starts with a hot take, A framed narrative, a clip stripped of context. The framing primes the reaction. By the time you see it, the outrage is already a take. You're not forming an opinion. You're joining one. The mechanism is emotional escalation. One person expresses anger. The next person matches it, then raises it. The third person raises it further. Each expression of outrage sets the baseline higher. Soon, the thread is competing for who can be most offended, most disgusted, most vocal. The incident itself becomes secondary. The performance of outrage becomes the point. Online platforms accelerate this. Outrage generates engagement, comments, shares, quote tweets. The algorithm sees activity and boosts the post. More people see it. More people react. The cycle tightens. What might have been a local incident becomes a national controversy because the outrage made it visible, and the visibility made more people outraged. Think about how fast this moves. A video surfaces. Someone behaving badly. Within hours, the person is identified. Their employer is tagged. Demands for firing flood in. The employer issues a statement. The person loses their job. The mob moves to the next target. The whole cycle completes before anyone asks if the full context was available, if the punishment fit the offense, if the outrage was proportionate. Or consider how ideological outrage spreads. A figure says something controversial. The quote gets clipped. The clip gets shared with commentary designed to maximize anger. Can you believe they said this? The audience doesn't hear the full statement. They hear the rage. They join it. The original speaker might clarify, apologize, or provide context. Doesn't matter. The outrage has already solidified. The clarification is treated as damage control, not correction. Moral outrage feels righteous. It feels like justice. You're not just angry. You're angry on behalf of something important. Values, principles, the people who were harmed. The righteousness makes the outrage feel justified, even necessary. Questioning it feels like betraying the cause. So the outrage grows unchecked. But the contagion doesn't distinguish between proportionate and disproportionate response. A minor offense and a major offense both trigger the same cycle. The scale of the outrage depends not on the scale of the wrong, but on how effectively the outrage spreads. A small wrong with viral outrage gets more attention, more punishment, more consequences than a large wrong that doesn't catch the algorithm's attention. The participation becomes performative. People join the outrage not because they're personally affected, but because being seen to be outraged signals alignment. It shows you're on the right side. Silence gets read as complicity. So people add their voice, not to contribute new information, but to be counted among the outraged. The collective fury grows not from depth of feeling, but from breadth of participation. And the contagion creates precedent. Each outrage cycle normalizes the next. The bar for what triggers collective fury lowers. The speed of the response quickens. The severity of the consequences intensifies. Outrage becomes the default mode, activated by smaller and smaller provocations, until the cycle runs constantly, burning through targets faster than context can form. Outrage contagion doesn't correct wrongs. It escalates reactions. The anger spreads because anger is contagious. The performance spreads because performance is visible. And the combination creates a feedback loop where the emotion, not the incident, drives the outcome. Scandal amplification. A rumor starts, small, vague, maybe baseless, but it lands in the right conditions. Media picks it up. Not as fact, but as a question. Concerns have been raised. Sources claim. The framing creates legitimacy without asserting truth. The question becomes the story. And once the story exists, the scandal is real, whether the underlying claim is or not. Scandal amplification is the process where the coverage of an allegation becomes larger than the allegation itself. The mechanism is circular. Media reports the rumor. The reporting makes the rumor newsworthy. The newsworthiness justifies more reporting. The cycle builds until the scandal dominates, independent of whether the original claim was ever verified. It starts with ambiguity, a hint, an accusation, an anonymous source. The claim is serious enough to attract attention, but vague enough to avoid immediate dismissal. Media outlets, operating on competitive pressure, start covering it. Not to confirm, but to avoid being left out. The coverage isn't investigative. It's reactive. Here's what's being said. The statement shifts responsibility from the outlet to the rumor itself. Watch how this escalates. One outlet runs the story. Competitors see the traffic. They run their own version. Each version cites the previous coverage as evidence that the story is significant. As reported by FA, the citations create a web of references, all pointing to each other, none pointing to verified facts. The appearance of consensus builds. The scandal feels substantial because the coverage is substantial. Think about how reputations collapse. An allegation surfaces. It's unproven, possibly false. But the coverage begins. Headlines frame it as a question. Is this person guilty? The question implies there's something to investigate. Public perception shifts. The person is now associated with the scandal, not the accusation's veracity. Defending themselves makes them look defensive. Ignoring it looks like evasion. Either way, the scandal sticks, or corporate scandals. A whistleblower makes a claim. The claim is serious. Media runs with it. Stock prices drop. Competitors pile on. Regulators start investigating. The investigation validates the coverage. The coverage intensifies. By the time the investigation concludes, the damage is done. Even if the findings are inconclusive or exonerating, the public remembers the scandal, not the resolution. The amplification feeds on itself. Each piece of coverage justifies the next. This is a developing story. New details emerge. The new details might be clarifications that weaken the original claim, but they're framed as expansions. The story grows regardless of direction. Exoneration gets reported as closure, but closure doesn't undo the weeks of scandal-driven coverage. Social media compounds it. Users share headlines, not articles. The headlines are designed for impact, not accuracy. Scandal rocks. Allegations surface. The sharing spreads the scandal frame. The details get lost. What circulates is the narrative something bad happened, someone is implicated. Truth becomes secondary to virality. The worst part is correction asymmetry. The scandal gets front-page coverage, continuous updates, expert commentary. The correction, if it comes, gets a brief mention, buried in later news cycles. The people who saw the scandal don't see the retraction. The impression remains. The amplification succeeded. The scandal is remembered. The truth is footnoted. Scandal amplification doesn't require guilt. It requires attention. Once attention locks on, the scandal becomes self-sustaining. The coverage proves the story is important. The importance justifies more coverage. And the cycle continues until the next scandal pulls focus, leaving behind a reputation damaged not by facts, but by the sheer volume of coverage suggesting something was wrong. Reputational gossip. They don't need proof, just a pattern. Have you noticed they're always late? The observation gets shared. Another person adds their instance. Then another. Soon, the pattern feels established. The person is now the one who's always late, even if the actual frequency doesn't support it. The reputation formed not from data, but from a handful of observations amplified through repetition. Reputational gossip is the informal system where social standing gets assigned and enforced through shared stories about behavior. It operates below official channels. No performance reviews, no formal complaints. Just conversations where character gets defined through anecdote and agreement. The process is efficient. Someone notices a behavior. They mention it. If others agree, the trait sticks. If others add examples, it solidifies. The person doesn't need to be present. The reputation builds in their absence, shaped by the people talking about them, not by them. By the time it reeks them, if it ever does, the narrative is set. Watch how this operates at work. A colleague makes a mistake. Someone mentions it over coffee. Did you hear about the report? Another person shares a different mistake from months ago. That's not the first time. The conversation creates a narrative. This person is careless. The narrative spreads through similar conversations. Managers hear it secondhand. The reputation influences decisions. Assignments, promotions, trust. All shaped by informal talk that the person being discussed never participated in. Or in social circles. Someone cancels plans. A friend mentions it. This is the third time. The group discusses it. Memories get surfaced selectively. The times they cancelled get remembered. The times they showed up get forgotten. The reputation forms unreliable. Invitations slow down. The person notices they're being excluded but doesn't know why. The gossip happened behind closed doors. The consequences play out in the open. The mechanism is selective memory reinforced by confirmation bias. Once the reputation is suggested, people start filtering observations through it. Behavior that fits the reputation gets noticed and remembered. Behavior that contradicts it gets dismissed as exceptions. The reputation becomes a lens that distorts perception to match expectation. Think about how gendered this gets. A woman speaks up in meetings. Reputational gossip frames her as aggressive. A man does the same, he's assertive. The behavior is identical. The gossip isn't. The narrative formed around her shapes how colleagues interpret every future interaction. She's not contributing. She's dominating. The reputation assigns motive and character without evidence. Or think about newcomers. They join a team, a community, a group. Early impressions get shared. They seem standoffish. The observation circulates. Others interpret the person's behavior through that frame. Quiet becomes aloof. Reserved becomes cold. The person might be introverted, adjusting, or just focused. Doesn't matter. The reputation decided they're standoffish. The group treats them accordingly. The treatment reinforces the behavior. The reputation becomes self-fulfilling. The gossip doesn't need malice. Often, it's just pattern recognition, people trying to make sense of behavior. But the pattern gets formed from incomplete information, shaped by whoever speaks first and loudest. The person being discussed has no chance to correct the record because they don't know the record exists. And defending against it is nearly impossible. You can't refute gossip you don't hear. You can't change a reputation you don't know you have. By the time the effects are visible, the conversations that caused them are long finished. Addressing it directly often backfires. Now you're the person who's defensive, who can't take feedback, who's difficult. The reputation gains another layer. Reputational gossip operates as distributed judgment. The group collectively decides who someone is, what they're like, what they're capable of. And once decided, the reputation becomes social fact, enforced through inclusion and exclusion, opportunity and limitation. The person didn't write their own story. The gossip network wrote it for them. Malicious gossip. The difference isn't subtlety, it's intent. Malicious gossip doesn't stumble into harm. It aims for it. The goal isn't to inform or make sense of behavior. It's to damage reputation, isolate the target, or gain advantage by tearing someone else down. It starts with selection. Not every piece of information gets shared. Malicious gossip picks the details that paint the worst picture. A mistake gets emphasized. Context gets stripped. Motive gets assumed, always the worst possible interpretation. The framing isn't neutral observation. It's weaponized narrative. The delivery is strategic. Malicious gossip doesn't blast publicly. It moves quietly, person to person, building consensus before the target knows they're under attack. The gossiper positions themselves as reluctant truth teller. I hate to say this, but the framing makes them look thoughtful, not vindictive. The content does the damage. The delivery protects the source. Watch how it targets. Someone threatens the gossiper's position. The gossiper starts circulating doubts. I've heard concerns about their judgment. The concerns are vague, hard to refute, impossible to source. Others hear it. Some dismiss it. But some hold on to it. The doubt plants. The next time the target makes a decision, the doubt surfaces. Didn't someone say they had questionable judgment? The gossip did its work. The target's credibility eroded without a single direct confrontation. Or consider romantic malicious gossip. Someone's interested in the same person. They start spreading stories about their rival. I heard they're not serious about relationships. Someone told me they cheated before. The stories might be false, exaggerated, or stripped of context. Doesn't matter. The goal is to make the rival look bad. The person hearing it might discount it. But it leaves a residue. Doubt. Hesitation. The malicious gossip created friction where there was none. Think about workplace dynamics. Someone's up for promotion. A colleague wants it. The colleague starts subtle campaigns. I'm not sure they're ready. I've noticed they struggle under pressure. The comments get dropped in conversations with decision makers. The comments are framed as observations, not attacks. But they accumulate. The decision makers start seeing the target through the lens the gossip created. The promotion goes to the gossiper. The target never knew they were being undermined. The cruelty is the invisibility. The target can sense something's wrong. Opportunities dry up. People become distant. But they can't point to a specific cause. The malicious gossip happened in conversations they weren't part of. The damage was done quietly, systematically, and by the time it's visible, the network has already accepted the narrative. Malicious gossip often targets vulnerability. New employees, people outside the dominant group, anyone without strong social protection. The gossiper knows these targets have fewer allies to counter the narrative. The isolation makes them easier to define. The definition makes them easier to exclude. And the gossiper rarely acts alone. They recruit. They test the ground with hints, see who's receptive, then go deeper with those people. The recruited become amplifiers. They repeat the gossip, adding their own observations that confirm it. The network effect makes the malicious gossip look like consensus. Multiple people have said, but the multiple people are all echoing the same poisoned source. The defense is brutal. Confronting the gossiper directly makes you look paranoid or aggressive. Ignoring it lets the damage compound. Defending yourself gives the gossip more to work with. See how defensive they get. Every response plays into the narrative the malicious gossip is building. Malicious gossip doesn't need truth. It needs plausibility and repetition. A story that could be true, repeated enough times, becomes accepted as true. And once accepted, it's nearly impossible to dislodge. The target's reputation is rewritten by someone who wanted to harm them, using a weapon that leaves no fingerprints and no way to fight back. Coalition gossip. You're new to the team. Two colleagues invite you to lunch. The conversation starts friendly, then it shifts. They mention a third coworker. Not overtly negative, just observations. They're a bit difficult in meetings. They don't really collaborate. You nod. You haven't worked with this person enough to know. But the message lands. You've been told who's in, who's out. And by listening, you've picked a side. Coalition gossip isn't about spreading information. It's about building alliances through shared targets. When people gossip together about a third party, they're not just talking. They're bonding. The act of criticizing someone else creates an us versus them dynamic. The gossip becomes the glue. The psychology is tribal. Humans form groups by defining boundaries. Who belongs, who doesn't. Shared opposition is one of the fastest ways to create cohesion. You might not have much in common with someone. But if you both dislike the same person, that becomes common ground. The gossip establishes alignment without requiring deeper connection. It operates strategically. The gossiper isn't just venting. They're recruiting. By sharing negative information about a target, they're testing your willingness to join their coalition. If you agree, you're in. If you defend the target, you've signaled you're not aligned. The gossip session doubles as a loyalty test. Think about office politics. A manager builds their inner circle not through competence assessments but through gossip alignment. Who laughs at the jokes about the rival department? Who nods when complaints are aired? Those people get brought closer. The ones who stay neutral or push back get kept at distance. The coalition forms around shared grievances, not shared goals. Or friend groups. Someone in the group becomes the topic. Not present, so they can't defend themselves. The rest discuss their flaws, their mistakes, their annoying habits. Each person contributes an observation. The ritual reinforces the group's bond. They're not just friends. They're the people who see through this person together. The shared criticism validates the group's superior judgment. The mechanism creates pressure. Once you've participated in coalition gossip, you're implicated. You can't easily switch sides later without looking disloyal. If you defend the target now, you're betraying the coalition you joined by gossiping about them earlier. The gossip doesn't just build the coalition. It locks you in. Watch how this plays in breakups. A couple splits. Each person talks to their friends. The friends hear one side. They start gossiping about the ex. I never liked them. You're better off. The gossip cements the friend group's loyalty. But it also means those friends can't later suggest reconciliation. They've already positioned themselves against the ex. The coalition gossip made neutrality impossible. Or community conflicts. A neighborhood dispute emerges. People take sides. Coalition gossip spreads. Each side talks about the other. The gossip doesn't resolve the conflict. It hardens the lines. Your neighbors become your allies or your opponents based on which gossip network you're part of. The issue itself becomes secondary to the coalitions the gossip built. The cruelty is the instrumentalization. The target isn't just being criticized. They're being used as a tool to create group cohesion. Their reputation gets sacrificed to build bonds between people who might not otherwise connect. The gossip isn't personal. It's functional. And that makes it harder to stop because it's serving a purpose for everyone except the person being talked about. Norm enforcement via gossip. No rule was written down. No announcement was made. But everyone knows. You show up dressed differently than the group's standard. By end of day, you've heard about it. Not from a manager. From gossip. Did you see what they were? The message is clear. Stay within the lines. Gossip operates as an informal enforcement mechanism. When official rules are absent or insufficient, gossip fills the gap. It punishes deviation, rewards conformity, and maintains social order without requiring formal authority. The group polices itself through talk. The system is efficient. Someone breaks an unwritten rule. Others notice. The gossip starts. Can you believe they did that? The criticism circulates. The target hears about it, either directly or through the shift in how they're treated. They adjust. The norm is reinforced. The group didn't need a rulebook. The gossip was the enforcement. It works because gossip carries social consequences. Being talked about negatively damages reputation. Damaged reputation means exclusion, lost opportunities, strained relationships. The threat of gossip keeps behavior in check. People conform not because they agree with the norm, but because they don't want to become the subject of group criticism. Think about workplace norms. Official policy says you can take your full lunch break. But gossip says otherwise. They're always gone for an hour. The tone implies laziness, lack of commitment. The gossip spreads. People start taking shorter lunches. Not because the rule changed, but because the social cost of using their full break got too high. Gossip enforced a norm the policy didn't create. Or social groups. Someone shares too much personal information. The group considers it oversharing. No one tells them directly. But the gossip starts. They always make everything about themselves. The person notices people pulling back. They don't know exactly why, but they feel the shift. They share less. The norm, unstated but clear, has been enforced. The enforcement is often gendered and racialized. Women gossip about women who violate feminine norms. She's too aggressive. She's not nurturing enough. Men gossip about men who violate masculine norms. He's too soft. He's not assertive. The gossip doesn't just enforce general social rules. It enforces identity-based expectations. Step outside your prescribed role, and the gossip network activates. Watch how it operates in communities. A neighbor doesn't maintain their lawn to neighborhood standards. The gossip begins. Have you seen their yard? The criticism isn't just about aesthetics. It's about not caring, not respecting the community, lowering property values. The gossip creates social pressure. The neighbor either conforms or becomes permanently marked as the problem house. The norm is enforced without a single official complaint. Or consider how gossip polices relationship behavior. Someone dates multiple people casually. Gossip frames it as promiscuity. Someone stays single too long. Gossip questions what's wrong with them. Someone gets serious too fast. Gossip calls it desperate. The gossip doesn't reflect actual harm. It reflects deviation from the group's relationship norms. The enforcement is social control disguised as concern. The power is in the invisibility. There's no formal accusation to defend against. No official process to appeal. Just ambient social pressure delivered through conversations you're not part of, enforcing standards you might not even know exist. And if you violate the norm, you won't get a memo. You'll just notice people talking differently about you. The enforcement happened. You adjusted. The system worked. Whisper network. She warns you quietly. Don't work with him alone. Don't accept drinks from him at company events. Don't be in the elevator with him if you can avoid it. She doesn't provide details. She doesn't need to. The warning is enough. You pass it to the next woman who joins the team. The information moves through unofficial channels, person to person, protecting those who know and leaving vulnerable those who don't. Whisper networks form when formal reporting systems fail. When complaints go unheard, when consequences don't follow misconduct, when victims face retaliation for speaking up, information goes underground. The network becomes the warning system that official channels should be but aren't. The structure is peer-to-peer. No central authority. No official record. Just people sharing knowledge they've gathered through experience or received from others. Don't be alone with this person. Avoid that situation. Watch out for this behavior. The warnings are specific enough to be useful, vague enough to avoid legal exposure. It operates on trust. You don't broadcast the warning publicly. You share it with people you trust, who share it with people they trust. The network is limited by personal connections. If you're not connected, you don't get warned. The protection is unequal by design. Not because the network wants to exclude, but because visibility makes the network vulnerable to retaliation. Think about how this plays in industries with power imbalances. Entertainment, academia, politics. People in positions of power misconduct. Victims report. Nothing happens. Or worse, they face professional consequences for reporting. The formal system failed. So the Whisper network activates. Don't audition alone with that director. Don't take a research position with that professor. The warnings circulate among those with access to the network. The abusers continue operating. But some potential victims get warned. Or workplaces where harassment is tolerated. Hay doesn't act. Managers protect the perpetrator. Victims stay silent to keep their jobs. But they warn each other. The Whisper network becomes the only accountability. The person doesn't face official consequences, but their behavior gets documented informally through warnings passed between colleagues. The network creates a parallel record that the company won't. The limitation is reach. Whisper networks protect insiders. If you're new, if you're outside the trusted circle, if you're in a different social network, you don't get the warning. The person who gets hired without knowing anyone is the most vulnerable. They have no access to the informal knowledge that could protect them. The network's strength, its secrecy, is also its weakness. And whisper networks can be weaponized. False warnings spread the same way true ones do. If someone wants to damage a reputation, they can inject a false warning into the network. Once it's circulating, it's nearly impossible to stop. The accused can't defend themselves because they don't know they're being warned against. The network operates on trust, but trust can be manipulated. The existence of whisper networks is an indictment. They shouldn't need to exist. If formal systems worked, if reports were taken seriously, if misconduct had real consequences, there'd be no need for underground information sharing. The network exists because protection failed at every official level. And the people the network is meant to protect are the ones who pay the cost of that failure, forced to navigate danger through informal warnings instead of systematic safety. Echo chamber effect. Everyone in your feed agrees with you. The articles confirm your views. The comments validate your opinions. Opposing perspectives don't appear, not because you're actively filtering them, but because the algorithm already did. You're not in a conversation. You're in an echo chamber, and the echoes sound so much like truth because they sound so much like you. The echo chamber effect is the reinforcement of beliefs through exposure to only confirming information. It's not about refusing to hear other views. It's about existing in an environment where other views never reach you. The chamber doesn't force you to believe. It just makes believing easier by removing contradiction. The mechanism is algorithmic and social. Platforms show you content similar to what you've engaged with before. You follow people who think like you. They share content that aligns with your views. The content you see becomes increasingly uniform, not because you demanded it, but because the system optimized for engagement, and engagement happens when people see things they already agree with. Watch how this builds. You interact with political content that leans one direction. The algorithm notes it. More content from that direction appears. You engage with that too. The pattern strengthens. Opposing views get filtered out. Not censored, just deprioritized. Over time, your feed becomes ideologically homogeneous. You're not choosing the bubble. The bubble is choosing itself around you. The danger is the invisibility. You don't see what you're not seeing. The opposing arguments, the contradictory evidence, the alternative perspectives, they exist. But they don't exist in your information environment. So from your position, it looks like consensus. Everyone agrees. The truth seems obvious. The opposition seems fringe, ridiculous, inexplicable. Because you've never actually encountered their best arguments, only the weakest versions your side mocks. Think about how this shapes political beliefs. Liberals in liberal echo chambers see only liberal takes. Conservatives in conservative echo chambers see only conservative takes. Each side thinks the other is brainwashed, misinformed, irrational. Neither realizes they're both operating in chambers that filter reality to match existing beliefs. The chambers don't make people wrong. They make people confident in positions that have never been genuinely challenged. Or product reviews. You see overwhelmingly positive reviews for an item. The algorithm is showing you reviews from people with similar preferences. Negative reviews exist, but they're from people with different priorities, so the system filtered them out. You buy based on what looks like consensus. The product arrives. It's not what you expected. The chamber created a distorted picture of reality that collapsed when you encountered the actual item. The chamber doesn't just affect what you believe. It affects what you think is believable. Spend enough time in an environment where everyone agrees, and positions outside that environment start sounding insane. Not wrong, insane. The chamber has normalized one set of views so completely that alternatives don't register as different opinions. They register as delusions. Social media compounds this by creating multiple overlapping chambers. Political chamber, professional chamber, hobby chamber. Each one reinforces itself, and the overlaps make the effect stronger. You see the same worldview confirmed across different contexts. Work, news, entertainment, social life. The consistency feels like proof. But it's just echo, repeating through interconnected chambers. Breaking out requires deliberate effort. You have to actively seek opposing views. You have to force yourself to engage with content that disagrees with you. And even then, the algorithm fights you. It wants to give you what you engage with most. And what you engage with most is what confirms what you already think. The chamber is designed to keep you comfortable. Comfort is the trap. Group polarization. They entered the meeting with different views. Some leaning one way, some another, most somewhere in the middle. They talked, discussed, deliberated. By the end, the group had shifted. Not toward the middle, toward consensus through compromise. Toward the extreme. The group's final position was more radical than any individual's starting position. Discussion didn't moderate. It polarized. Group polarization is the phenomenon where group deliberation pushes positions toward extremes rather than toward middle ground. People assume discussion produces moderation. It doesn't. In homogeneous groups, discussion amplifies existing leanings. The group doesn't find balance. It finds a more extreme version of where it started. The mechanism is social comparison and persuasive arguments. In a group that leans one direction, people don't want to seem less committed than others. So they adjust their expressed position to match or exceed the group's lean. The adjustment isn't dishonest. It's motivated reasoning. The group's lean makes more extreme positions feel justified, even admirable. Being on the far edge of the group's direction feels like leadership, not extremism. Watch this in action. A group discusses a political issue. Most lean progressive. During discussion, each person tries to signal their progressive credentials. The statements get more progressive with each contribution. By the end, the group has adopted a position more left than anyone held individually at the start. The same process happens in conservative groups shifting right. The group didn't moderate itself. It radicalized itself. Or jury deliberations. Jurors enter with a slight lean toward conviction. They discuss. The ones leaning conviction argue their case. The ones closer to the middle hear the arguments, hear the confidence, and shift. By the end, the verdict is conviction with higher certainty than any individual juror felt initially. The deliberation didn't produce careful weighing. It produced group movement toward the dominant initial lean. Think about online communities. A forum attracts people interested in a topic. Initially, views vary, but as the community discusses, the range narrows. Moderate positions get pushed out. Extreme positions get elevated. The community doesn't diversify through discussion. It homogenizes toward extremes. The people who don't follow the shift leave. The ones who stay become more extreme. The polarization feeds itself. The effect is stronger in ideologically homogeneous groups. When everyone starts from a similar baseline, the shift goes unchecked. There's no opposing voice to pull the other direction. The group's lean becomes the group's identity. And identity protection drives further extremism. Moderating becomes betrayal. Moving further becomes loyalty. Corporate culture shows this. A team develops a certain approach. Meetings reinforce it. Anyone suggesting alternatives gets framed as not understanding the culture. The approach becomes more entrenched, more extreme, more resistant to change. The group didn't reason its way to the extreme position. It socially influenced its way there, step by step, through discussions that rewarded alignment and punished deviation. Even groups formed to make balanced decisions polarize. Committees, panels, boards. If the members share a baseline perspective, Their deliberations don't check bias. They amplify it. The discussion creates the illusion of thorough consideration. But the outcome was predetermined by the composition. A group of people leaning one way will lean further after discussion, convinced they've arrived at the position through careful thought rather than social dynamics. The irony is brutal. The more a group discusses, the more extreme it becomes. The process meant to refine judgment through collective wisdom instead drives the collective toward positions more extreme than the individuals would have reached alone. The wisdom of crowds fails when the crowd is an echo chamber with a lean. The group doesn't find truth. It finds the loudest version of what it already believed. Confirmation spread. You see a headline. It confirms what you already suspected. You don't read the article. You share it. Not because you verified the claim, but because it validates your existing belief. The headline told you what you wanted to hear, and that was enough. The content spreads not on merit, but on alignment with what people already think. Confirmation spread is the preferential sharing of information that supports existing beliefs. It's not active misinformation. It's selective amplification. True claims that confirm belief spread further than true claims that contradict them. The accuracy doesn't determine the reach. The alignment does. The mechanism is cognitive efficiency. Verifying information takes effort. Sharing information takes a click. When information aligns with what you believe, verification feels unnecessary. It already fits your model of reality. When information contradicts what you believe, it triggers skepticism. You look for flaws, check sources, question methodology. The asymmetry means confirming information spreads faster and farther than challenging information, regardless of which is more accurate. Watch how this plays out. A study supports your position on a contentious issue. You share it immediately. Another study contradicts your position. You scrutinize it, find methodological concerns, dismiss it. Both studies might be equally rigorous, but your engagement with them was different. The first got amplified. The second got critique. Your sharing behavior just made the information landscape more biased. Not because you intended to, but because confirmation bias shaped what you passed along. Think about political information. A news story emerges. It makes one side look bad. That side examines it closely, finds issues, questions the framing. The other side shares it widely without the same scrutiny. The story spreads asymmetrically. Not because one side is more gullible, but because confirmation bias lowers the bar for what gets shared. The information environment becomes skewed not by which claims are true, but by which claims get preferentially amplified by the people who agree with them. Or health information. Someone sees a study supporting their dietary beliefs. See, I knew it, shared hundreds of times. A study contradicting those beliefs appears. That study was funded by industry, shared once with criticism. The confirmation spread doesn't require conspiracy. Just a million individual decisions to share what feels right and question what feels wrong. Social media accelerates this. The algorithm shows you content you're likely to engage with. You engage most with content that confirms your beliefs. The algorithm learns, shows you more, you share more. The pattern reinforces. Your feed becomes increasingly filled with information that confirms what you already think, and you become the vector spreading that information to others. The confirmation spread is both personal and algorithmic, each reinforcing the other. The effect creates information bubbles that are self-affirming. You share confirming information. Your network, which likely shares your views, also shares it. The information circulates within the bubble, gaining apparent credibility through repetition. Contradicting information doesn't get the same treatment. It enters the bubble, faces scrutiny, gets dismissed. The bubble maintains itself through differential spread. And the spread doesn't just affect what you see. It affects what exists in the information environment. Content creators notice what spreads. They produce more of it. Confirming information gets more engagement, so more confirming information gets created. The marketplace of ideas doesn't select for truth. It selects for confirmation. The information landscape skews not toward accuracy, but toward what existing audiences want to hear. Confirmation spread doesn't require deception. It just requires human nature, the tendency to accept what confirms and question what challenges. Multiply that tendency across millions of people making individual sharing decisions, and the cumulative effect is an information environment where confirmation beats accuracy, where alignment beats truth, and where what you already believe is what you're most likely to hear again. Conspiracy diffusion. The explanation is too simple, too convenient. Someone must be hiding something. The official story doesn't add up, not because you've found contradicting evidence, but because complexity feels suspicious. Simplicity feels naive. So you start looking for the pattern beneath the pattern. And once you start looking, you find it. Not because it's there, but because the search creates what it seeks. Conspiracy theories spread not through evidence, but through the feeling that you've uncovered something others missed. The appeal isn't the theory itself. It's the sensation of seeing through the facade, of being among the few who understand what's really happening. The theory makes you feel informed, not deceived. And that feeling is contagious. The structure exploits how people process uncertainty. When events are random or chaotic, the mind resists. Randomness feels wrong. Chaos feels unbearable. A conspiracy, even a dark one, offers order. Someone is in control. Someone has a plan. The conspiracy isn't comforting, but it's comprehensible. And comprehensible beats random. Watch how conspiracies form. A major event occurs. Tragedy, disaster, political shift. The official explanation emerges. But the event was complex. The explanation simplifies. The gap between complexity and simplification becomes the opening. They're not telling us everything. The distrust doesn't need proof. It just needs plausibility. And in that gap, the conspiracy takes root. The diffusion accelerates through motivated reasoning. People who already distrust authority are primed to accept conspiracy explanations. People who feel powerless are drawn to theories that expose hidden power. People who want to feel special are attracted to exclusive knowledge. The conspiracy doesn't spread because it's true. It spreads because it satisfies psychological needs the official explanation doesn't. Think about how this operates online. A conspiracy theory emerges. Early adopters share it. The sharing creates a community. The community reinforces the belief. Members share supporting evidence, real or fabricated. Contradicting evidence gets dismissed as part of the cover-up. The dismissal isn't illogical within the conspiracy's framework. If they're powerful enough to engineer the event, they're powerful enough to engineer the denial. Every piece of counter-evidence becomes proof of how deep it goes. Or consider how conspiracies layer. One conspiracy leads to another. If they lied about this, what else are they lying about? The distrust generalizes. Soon, multiple conspiracies connect. The conspiracy theorist isn't believing one false thing. They're operating in an alternate framework where official sources are systematically deceptive and only the conspiracy community has access to truth. The diffusion creates social sorting. Believers cluster, skeptics are excluded or leave. The community becomes ideologically homogeneous. Within that space, the conspiracy isn't fringe. It's consensus. The isolation from outside perspectives makes the belief feel stronger, not weaker. Everyone you trust agrees. Everyone who disagrees is either ignorant or complicit. And the conspiracy becomes unfalsifiable. Every piece of evidence against it gets reinterpreted as evidence for it. Lack of proof becomes proof of how well the conspiracy is hidden. Expert denial becomes proof of expert corruption. The theory can't be disproven because it's designed to absorb contradiction. The diffusion isn't about spreading truth. It's about spreading a framework where truth becomes whatever the community decides to trust. credibility by familiarity. You've seen the name before, read the headline, scrolled past the logo. Never engaged deeply, but the exposure registered. Now you're evaluating sources. 2 options. One you've encountered multiple times. One you haven't. You lean toward the familiar one. Not because you researched its track record, but because recognition feels like credibility. Your brain mistakes, "I've seen this before," for "this is trustworthy." Familiarity breeds perceived legitimacy. Repeated exposure to a source, a name, a claim makes it feel more reliable. The feeling isn't based on verification. It's based on the ease of processing. Familiar information processes smoothly. Smooth processing registers as true. The logic never gets examined. The familiarity does the work. This is why repetition matters more than accuracy in information warfare. A false claim from an unfamiliar source gets dismissed. The same claim from a familiar source gets considered. The source didn't earn credibility through accuracy. It earned credibility through visibility. The more you see a name, a logo, a voice, the more your brain tags it as established, authoritative, trustworthy. None of those assessments came from evaluation. They came from exposure. Watch how this builds brands. A company advertises relentlessly. You see the name everywhere. Billboards, commercials, social media sponsorships. You've never used their product. Never read a review. But when you're making a purchase decision, their name's to mind first. And first feels safe. The familiarity created by advertising gets interpreted as market leadership, quality, reliability. None of that was proven. It was implied through omnipresence, or media sources. You've seen a news outlet's logo repeatedly. Their articles appear in your feed. You haven't fact-checked them. Haven't compared their accuracy to competitors. But when someone questions their credibility, you defend them. Not because you've verified their track record, but because they're familiar. Familiarity made them feel legitimate. The questioning feels like an attack on something established, even though you never established it yourself. Think about expert credibility. Someone appears on multiple shows, quoted in multiple articles. The repetition makes them seem authoritative. Their expertise might be thin, their claims questionable. But you've seen their name take to the topic enough times that they feel like the expert. The familiarity did more work than their credentials. Political figures use this ruthlessly. Get your name out there. Constantly. Doesn't matter if the attention is positive or negative. What matters is visibility. The brain starts tagging the name as significant. Significant feels like viable. By the time elections come, the familiar name has an advantage over the unknown one. Voters aren't choosing the better candidate. They're choosing the one that feels less risky, because the name already processed smoothly hundreds of times before. The mechanism doesn't distinguish between familiarity and quality. A repeated lie becomes more believable than a single truth. A heavily promoted mediocre product outperforms an obscure excellent one. A frequently mentioned unreliable source gets more trust than a rarely mentioned rigorous one. Familiarity isn't evidence, but the brain treats it like it is. And the effect compounds. Once you start trusting a familiar source, you expose yourself to it more. The increased exposure makes it more familiar. The increased familiarity makes it more credible. The cycle reinforces. You didn't choose the source based on merit. You chose it based on recognition. And now the recognition has become its own justification. Source amnesia. You know the fact. You remember the claim. But where did you hear it? Can't recall. Was it a news article? A social media post? Something a friend said? The information stuck, but the source dissolved. And because you can't remember the source, you can't evaluate its reliability. The fact floats free, untethered from any context that might help you judge whether it's actually true. Source amnesia is the phenomenon where you remember information, but forget where it came from. The brain stores content and context separately. Content persists. Context fades. And when context fades, you lose the ability to assess credibility. The information feels like knowledge, even when you can't verify its origin. This makes misinformation incredibly sticky. You encounter a false claim. At the time, you might note it came from an unreliable source. You mentally flag it as questionable. But weeks later, the content remains. The flag is gone. You remember the claim, not the caution. When the topic comes up, the claim surfaces. It feels familiar, like something you know. The source amnesia stripped away the warning, leaving only the information. Watch how this operates in conversations. Someone repeats a claim you've heard before. I read somewhere that. The repetition reinforces it. You start thinking you've seen it multiple places, but really you're just remembering the same claim from a source you've forgotten. The amnesia creates the illusion of consensus. Multiple exposures feel like multiple confirmations, even when they all trace back to a single unreliable origin. Think about how rumors solidify. A rumor starts. You hear it, note it's unverified. Later, you hear it again. The source is forgotten, but the claim is familiar. Familiar feels true. You mention it to someone else. I think I heard that. The uncertainty in your phrasing doesn't stop the spread. The person hears the claim, notes you said it, later forgets you were uncertain. The rumor passes through multiple people, losing its source context each time until it circulates as accepted fact. Nobody verified it. Everybody forgot where it came from. Or consider statistics. You remember a number. 80% of people. Where did you get that number? Can't recall. Was it a reputable study? A tweet? A tweet? A misremembered headline? You don't know. But the number feels concrete. So you use it. The source amnesia transformed a potentially false statistic into something that sounds authoritative because it's specific, even though you have no idea if it's accurate. The effect gets worse with time. Immediate memory includes source tags. I saw this on this site, this person told me. But as time passes, the tags degrade. The content remains sharp, the context blurs. A claim you initially doubted becomes something you just know, because the doubt was a take to the source and the source is gone. Social media accelerates this. You scroll past hundreds of posts. Information enters your brain. Days later, you remember the claim but not the post. Was it news? Opinion? Satire? Ad? You don't know. The claim survived. The context didn't. And now you're walking around with information in your head that you can't verify because you don't remember where you got it. Source amnesia doesn't just affect false information. True information loses credibility too. You remember a fact, can't remember the source, feel uncertain about sharing it because you can't back it up. The amnesia doesn't distinguish between quality sources and garbage. It erases context indiscriminately. What remains is a jumble of claims, some true, some false, all equally untethered from the evidence that could confirm or refute them. Unverified belief adoption. How many things do you believe right now that you've never personally verified? Most of them. You believe the earth is round, but you've never measured it. You believe bacteria cause illness, but you've never seen them. You believe historical events happened, but you weren't there. Your beliefs run mostly on trust. Trust in education, in experts, in systems that verify information for you. And that trust is usually warranted. Usually. But the same mechanism that makes you trust verified information also makes you vulnerable to unverified claims. You're used to adopting beliefs without personal verification. The habit is necessary. You can't verify everything. But the habit doesn't distinguish between information that's been verified by trustworthy systems and information that just sounds authoritative enough to skip the verification step. Unverified belief adoption is the process of accepting claims without checking them because they fit existing expectations or come from seemingly credible sources. It's not gullibility. It's cognitive efficiency. You can't fact-check every statement you encounter, so you use shortcuts. Does it align with what you already believe? Does the source seem credible? Does it match your general understanding of how things work? If yes, you accept it. The problem is, those shortcuts can be exploited. Watch how this happens. Someone makes a claim. It sounds technical, specific, confident. Studies show, experts agree. Data indicates, the framing mimics verified information. Your brain processes it the same way. You don't stop to ask which studies, which experts, which data. The claim had the right structure, so it passed your filter. You've adopted a belief you never verified. Think about health information. Someone tells you a supplement does something. They use medical-sounding language. Cite vague research. You don't verify the research. You don't check if the claim is supported, but the presentation matched your template for legitimate health information. So you believe it. Maybe you even start taking the supplement. The belief was adopted without verification because the claim was packaged correctly. Or political claims. A figure states a policy will have a certain effect. They cite economic principles. Use statistics. You don't verify the statistics. Don't check if the economic model actually supports the prediction. But it sounded informed. It matched the way policy arguments are supposed to sound. So the belief gets adopted. You now hold an opinion about a policy based on unverified claims that fit your expectations of how policy analysis works. The mechanism is trust transfer. You know that some sources are trustworthy. You've learned to trust doctors, scientists, educators. But bad actors can mimic the markers of trustworthiness. Lab coats. Credentials. Technical language. The mimicry triggers the same trust response. You adopt beliefs from these sources as if they'd been verified, when really, they've just been styled to look verified. Social proof compounds this. If enough people have adopted the belief that feels like verification, everyone knows. But everyone adopted it the same way you're about to. Nobody checked. The collective adoption creates the illusion of collective verification. The belief spreads not because it was proven, but because it was adopted by enough people that further adoption feels safe. And once adopted, beliefs resist verification. If someone asks you to verify a belief you've held for a while, it feels like questioning your judgment. The belief integrated into your worldview. Checking it now means admitting you've been operating on unverified information. Easier to maintain the belief than to face the possibility that you accepted something false. The unverified adoption becomes permanent because verification feels threatening. Meme transmission psychology. It's not the funniest joke, not the smartest observation, but it's shareable. Short, punchy, easy to understand in a glance. The format is familiar. The sentiment resonates. You send it. They send it. It spreads not because it's profound, but because it's optimized for transmission. That's what memes do. They evolve not toward truth or quality, but toward spreadability. Meme transmission follows evolutionary logic. The ideas that survive aren't the best ideas. They're the most contagious ideas. Complexity gets trimmed. Nuance gets dropped. What remains is the version that spreads fastest. The meme isn't trying to be accurate. It's trying to replicate. And replication favors simplicity, emotion, and alignment with existing beliefs. The psychology is about reducing friction. A complex argument requires thought. Thought slows sharing. A simple image with text requires no thought. It triggers an emotional response. You agree, you laugh, you feel validated. You share. The meme moved from their brain to yours to your networks without encountering resistance. That's transmission optimization. Watch how memes evolve. A concept emerges. Complex, nuanced. Someone distills it into a shareable format. Image, caption, punchline. The distillation loses detail but gains spread. Someone else simplifies further, removes caveats, sharpens the point. Each iteration trades accuracy for velocity. The final meme bears little resemblance to the original idea, but it spreads faster because it shed everything that might slow it down. Think about political memes. A policy has multiple effects, trade-offs, contexts. The meme version reduces it to good or bad. Your side or their side. The reduction is false, but it's shareable. The nuanced take doesn't fit in an image macro. The simplification does. So the simplification spreads. And as it spreads, it becomes how people understand the policy. Not through analysis, but through the meme that survived the transmission filter. Or moral outrage memes. Something happens. The full context is messy. The meme strips context, highlights the most inflammatory angle. The version that spreads fastest isn't the most accurate. It's the one that triggers the strongest emotional reaction. Outrage spreads faster than understanding. So the outrage version becomes the dominant version. The meme didn't inform. It activated. The mechanism selects for specific traits, emotional resonance, in-group signaling, simplicity, humor. The memes that have these traits spread. The ones that don't die. Over time, the information environment fills with highly transmissible content that may or may not be true, useful, or accurate. What matters is whether it spreads. Social platforms amplify this. Algorithms prioritize engagement. Memes generate engagement. So memes get boosted. The boost increases exposure. Increased exposure increases spread. The platforms aren't selecting for quality. They're selecting for viral potential. And viral potential correlates with emotional intensity and cognitive ease, not with truth. And once a meme embeds, it's hard to dislodge. The corrected version is longer, more complex, less shareable. It can't compete with the meme it's trying to correct. The meme has transmission advantage. It got there first. It spread faster. It's simpler. The correction might be true, but the meme is contagious. And in the competition for mindshare, contagious beats correct. Social amplification of risk. A small danger gets reported. The report gets shared. The sharing triggers concern. The concern gets amplified. More sharing, more concern, more amplification. The cycle continues until a minor risk feels like a major threat. Not because the danger grew, but because the social response grew. The amplification created a perceived risk far larger than the actual risk. This is social amplification of risk. The process where social reactions to a hazard intensify the public's perception of danger beyond what the data supports. The risk doesn't change. The response to the risk changes, and the response becomes its own signal feeding back into perception, creating a loop where fear generates more fear. It starts with information, a study, a report, an incident. The information gets communicated. Media covers it. People share it. The coverage and sharing aren't neutral transmission. They're interpretation. Headlines emphasize threat. Commentary stresses danger. Each layer of communication adds emotional weight. The original risk estimate gets buried under layers of amplification. Think about how this plays with health scares. A substance is found to slightly increase risk under specific conditions. The finding is technical, limited. The headline reads, chemical linked to disease. The headline gets shared. Did you know this causes disease? The claim gets stronger with each transmission. By the time it reaches most people, the nuance is gone. The substance sounds deadly. The amplification turned a marginal risk into a major scare, or product recalls. A batch has a defect. The company recalls it. Responsible action. But the recall gets reported as a crisis. Thousands of products pulled. The sharing spreads alarm. People assume all units are dangerous, not just the affected batch. The social amplification made the perceived risk much larger than the actual risk. The company's precaution triggered a panic that exceeded the hazard. The mechanism is social proof applied to fear. If many people are worried, the worry feels justified. You see widespread concern. You don't evaluate whether the concern matches the data. You match your response to the group's response. The group's amplification becomes your amplification. The fear spreads through social mirroring, not through rational risk assessment. Media plays a structural role. Threat gets attention. Attention drives coverage. Coverage drives more attention. The cycle selects for alarming interpretations over measured ones. A comm expert saying, "The risk is small," doesn't generate engagement. An alarmed expert saying, "We should be very concerned," does. So the alarmed voice gets amplified. The measured voice gets ignored. The social amplification skews the information environment toward fear. Online communities accelerate this. A concern gets raised. The community discusses it. The discussion surfaces worst-case scenarios. The scenarios get repeated. The repetition makes them feel more likely. Probability estimates shift not because new evidence emerged, but because social amplification made extreme outcomes feel normal. The community amplified itself into heightened fear, and the amplification has real consequences. People make decisions based on perceived risk, not actual risk. Avoid products, change behaviors, demand regulations. The responses might be disproportionate to the danger, but they're proportionate to the amplified perception. The social amplification didn't just change feelings. It changed actions, policies, markets, all driven by response that outgrew the risk that triggered it. The correction is nearly impossible. De-amplification doesn't work the same way amplification does. Fear spreads faster than reassurance. Alarm is more shareable than calm. Trying to reduce the perceived risk back to the actual risk requires fighting the social momentum that built up during amplification. And that momentum, once established, resists reversal. The amplified risk becomes the accepted risk, regardless of what the data actually shows. Attention cascade. A minor story breaks. A few outlets cover it. The coverage drives traffic. More outlets notice the traffic. They cover it too. Their coverage drives more attention. The cycle feeds itself. Within hours, a story that barely mattered is dominating feeds, trending on platforms, discussed everywhere. Not because it's important, but because attention created more attention. The cascade didn't follow significance. It followed momentum. Attention cascades happen when coverage of a topic becomes newsworthy in itself. The story isn't "this event matters." The story is "everyone's talking about this event." The focus shifts from the content to the attention. And once attention becomes the story, the cascade is self-sustaining. Media covers what's getting attention. Attention rewards media coverage. The loop tightens. The mechanism is competitive pressure. News outlets, content creators, social media users all operate in attention economies. Ignore what's trending and you fall behind. Join the trend and you stay relevant. The pressure to participate isn't about the topic's merit. It's about the topic's visibility. Once the cascade starts, staying out means losing audience. Watch how this plays on social media. A topic starts trending. People check why. The checking boosts the trend. The boost makes more people check. Each check adds to the momentum. Soon, the platform is saturated with the topic. Not because the topic earned the attention through importance, but because the attention justified itself through volume. Think about celebrity controversies. A minor incident occurs. A few people comment. The comments get noticed. More people comment. Media outlets write, "Here's why everyone's talking about." The article drives more talk. The talk justifies more articles. The cascade grows until a trivial event consumes days of attention. The controversy wasn't proportional to the incident. It was proportional to the cascade. Or viral moments. Something mildly interesting happens. Early shares create visibility. Visibility creates more shares. The acceleration hits a point where sharing happens, not because the content is exceptional, but because everyone else is sharing it. The cascade made participation feel necessary. Miss the moment, miss the conversation. So people share without evaluating, just to stay part of the collective attention. The cascade doesn't require quality. It requires ignition. Once a topic catches, the attention mechanics take over. Mediocre content on a rising cascade beats exceptional content ignored by the cascade. The system doesn't reward the best. It rewards the most visible. And visibility generates more visibility faster than quality generates discovery. News cycles demonstrate this brutally. A story dominates for days. Constant coverage, endless analysis, saturated discussion. Then it stops. Not because the story resolved, but because the attention moved. A new cascade started. The previous topic, once inescapable, disappears. The cascade shifted. Attention followed. The content became irrelevant the moment the momentum died. And the cascade distorts priority. Issues that matter but don't ignite cascades get ignored. Issues that don't matter but catch attention dominate. The public consciousness isn't shaped by importance. It's shaped by cascade dynamics. What gets attention isn't what's significant. It's what triggered the self-reinforcing cycle that made attention its own justification. Scapegoat narrative spread. Something went wrong. People want to know why. The real causes are complex, systemic, diffuse. But complexity doesn't satisfy. People want a target, someone to blame, someone whose fault this is. And once a scapegoat is identified, the narrative spreads faster than any explanation that implicates systems, processes, or collective responsibility. Scapegoat narratives simplify causality by assigning blame to a person or group. The simplification is false, but it's psychologically efficient. Instead of grappling with multiple contributing factors, structural problems, or shared culpability, the narrative offers a clean villain. The problem becomes solvable. Remove the villain, problem solved. The appeal isn't accuracy. It's resolution. The spread is rapid because scapegoating satisfies emotional needs. Anger needs a target. Blame needs a recipient. The scapegoat provides both. Directing fury at a person feels productive in a way that addressing systemic dysfunction doesn't. The narrative gives the anger somewhere to go. And once it's directed, it spreads through networks of people looking for the same outlet. Watch how this operates after failures. A project collapses. Leadership scrambles to explain. The real causes are distributed. Poor planning, inadequate resources, miscommunication, external factors. But the narrative that spreads isn't, we all contributed to this. It's this person sabotaged it. The scapegoat narrative travels because it's simple, emotionally satisfying, and absolves everyone else. Think about economic downturns. The causes are complex. Policy failures, market dynamics, global shifts, structural weaknesses. But the narrative that gains traction identifies scapegoats. Immigrants. Corporations. The other political party. The scapegoat varies, but the mechanism is the same. Complex causality gets collapsed into. They're the reason you're suffering. The narrative spreads not because it's accurate, but because it channels frustration toward a visible target. Or public health crisis. A disease spreads. The contributing factors are numerous. Policy decisions, resource allocation, individual behavior, biological chance. But scapegoat narratives emerge. A demographic group. A geographic region. A set of behaviors. The narrative identifies who's to blame. The identification spreads. People adopt it not because they've verified it, but because having a scapegoat feels better than facing systemic failure or random misfortune. The mechanism protects the majority. Scapegoats are usually minorities, outsiders, the already marginalized. The narrative says, the problem is them, not us. The formulation preserves the majority's self-image while explaining the crisis. The spread happens because the narrative offers comfort to everyone who isn't the scapegoat. And those people are the majority, so the spread is wide. Social media accelerates this. A scapegoat narrative emerges. It's shareable, emotionally charged, simple. It spreads through networks. Each share reinforces it. Contradicting evidence gets dismissed. The scapegoat must be guilty because so many people are saying they are. The narrative becomes self-validating through volume. And once established, the scapegoat narrative is hard to correct. The truth is complex. The narrative is simple. The truth requires thought. The narrative requires none. The truth doesn't offer emotional release. The narrative does. In the competition between a complex explanation and a simple scapegoat, the scapegoat wins. Not because it's right, but because it's easier to spread, easier to believe, and easier to use. Stigma diffusion. The label gets a take. Maybe deserved, maybe not. But once it's on, it spreads. Not just the information, but the judgment. People who've never met the person, never examined the situation, adopt the stigma. They treat the labeled individual differently. The stigma didn't come from their own assessment. It came from the network, and the network rarely checks if the label was earned. Stigma diffusion is the spread of social marking that separates, devalues, or discredits a person or group. The mark doesn't require verification. It requires transmission. Once enough people treat someone as stigmatized, the stigma becomes real in its social effects, regardless of whether the underlying reason holds up. The process starts with labeling. Someone gets marked as untrustworthy, incompetent, dangerous, deviant. The label might originate from a real incident, a misunderstanding, or deliberate attack. The origin doesn't control the spread. What controls the spread is how well the label aligns with existing biases and how easily it transmits through social networks. Think about professional reputations. Someone makes a mistake. It gets talked about. The talk assigns a label. Reliable. The label spreads through the workplace. People who weren't involved, who didn't see the mistake, start treating the person as unreliable. They're not invited to important projects. Their input gets discounted. The stigma diffused through social talk, not through direct evidence. Or consider how stigma takes to groups. A negative association forms. Crime, poverty, disease, moral failure. The association spreads. People who've never interacted with the group adopt the stigma. They avoid, discriminate, devalue. The stigma diffused from media coverage, political rhetoric, or cultural narrative. The people carrying the stigma didn't verify the association. They absorbed it from the information environment. Watch how stigma operates in communities. Someone violates a norm, real or perceived. The community starts talking. The talker takes stigma. The person gets treated differently, excluded from social events, avoided in casual interaction, assumed to have ulterior motives. The stigma didn't from the community witnessing the violation. It came from the community hearing about it and passing the judgment along. The diffusion doesn't require the labeled person to repeat the behavior. One incident, or even one accusation, can generate lasting stigma. The stigma persists because it spreads through networks faster than corrections, faster than rehabilitation, faster than evidence of change. Once diffused, stigma is sticky. It clings to the person through repeated social transmission, even when the original cause fades. Online environments make stigma diffusion permanent. A label gets attacked online. It spreads through posts, comments, shares. The labeled person's name becomes associated with the stigma. Search their name, the stigma appears. The digital diffusion never fully disappears. The person can't escape the label because the network keeps recirculating it. The stigma isn't just social anymore. It's archived. The mechanism is self-protective for the group. Stigma creates boundaries. It marks who's in and who's out. The diffusion reinforces group norms by showing what happens when you deviate. The stigmatized person becomes an example. The group doesn't need to formally punish. The stigma does the work through distributed social enforcement. And the diffusion can be weaponized. Attach stigma to an opponent. Let it spread. The stigma damages reputation without requiring proof. By the time the target responds, the stigma has already diffused through networks. The defense looks defensive. The stigma has done its damage. The diffusion accomplished what direct attack couldn't. Deviance amplification. A behavior emerges. It's unusual, maybe concerning, but relatively minor. Authorities respond. Media covers the response. The coverage makes the behavior more visible. More people become aware. Some are curious. Some try it. The behavior increases. Authorities respond more forcefully. More coverage. More awareness. More participation. The cycle continues until the minor behavior has grown into a significant problem. Not because it was destined to be, but because the response amplified it. Deviance amplification is the process where social reaction to a behavior increases the behavior's prevalence. The attempt to control or suppress makes the behavior more attractive, more visible, or more oppositional. The response doesn't reduce the deviance. It escalates it. The mechanism is visibility. When authorities crack down on a behavior, they draw attention to it. The crackdown signals the behavior is significant enough to warrant intervention. That signal attracts interest. People who never heard of the behavior now know about it. Some are intrigued. Some are rebellious. The crackdown made the behavior famous. Fame drives participation. Think about youth subcultures. A style emerges. Adults condemn it. The condemnation makes it more appealing to youth. It's no longer just a style. It's rebellion. The opposition gives it meaning beyond aesthetics. More young people adopt it, not despite the condemnation, but because of it. The deviance amplified through the attempt to suppress it. Or moral panics around content. A type of media gets criticized as harmful. The criticism creates buzz. People seek out the content to see what the fuss is about. Consumption increases. The increase validates the concern. More criticism follows. More attention. More consumption. The amplification loop made the content more widespread than it would have been without intervention. Watch how this plays with bans. A substance gets banned. The ban signals danger, taboo, forbidden fruit. The signal makes the substance more interesting. People seek it out specifically because it's banned. The prohibition amplified demand. The behavior the ban was meant to eliminate increased because the ban made it symbolically powerful. Or restrictions on information. An idea gets censored. The censorship signals the idea is threatening. People become curious. What's so dangerous it had to be hidden? The curiosity drives seeking. The idea spreads further than it would have without censorship. The attempt to contain amplified the spread. The Streisand effect at scale. The amplification is stronger when the response is heavy-handed. Proportionate response might not amplify. But overreaction signals significance. It tells people, this matters enough to bring force against. The signal elevates the behavior, makes it worthy of attention, worth participating in, worth defending. The deviance gains status through the intensity of opposition. Think about how protest movements grow. A small action occurs. Authorities overact. The overreaction gets covered. The coverage attracts sympathy. More people join the movement. Not because they were initially committed, but because the harsh response made the cause look important, dangerous, worth fighting for. The deviance amplified through the very force meant to stop it. The irony is brutal. The response designed to reduce the behavior makes it more prevalent. The visibility, the symbolic meaning, the oppositional identity, all gifts from the attempt to suppress. The authorities created what they feared by trying to eliminate it. The deviance didn't grow on its own momentum. It grew on reaction momentum. The amplification was a gift from those who meant to destroy it. Plausibility by repetition. It sounded implausible the first time. You noted it, moved on. But you kept hearing it. Different contexts, different people, same claim. By the fifth exposure, it stopped sounding strange. By the 10th, it started sounding familiar. And somewhere along the way, familiar became plausible. Not because you found evidence, because repetition created the feeling that maybe there's something to it. Plausibility by repetition is when repeated exposure to a claim makes it feel more believable, regardless of supporting evidence. The brain doesn't distinguish between "I've heard this many times" and "this has been verified many times." Frequency creates familiarity. Familiarity feels like validation. The claim gains perceived credibility through sheer repetition. The psychology is processing fluency. Repeated information processes more easily. The ease registers as truth signal. Your brain interprets the smooth processing as, "This is correct information." You're not consciously deciding to believe it. Your cognitive system is marking it as plausible because it's no longer novel or difficult to process. Watch how this operates in advertising. A brand makes a claim about their product. Exaggerated, maybe false. But they repeat it relentlessly. Same slogan, same pitch, different formats. You hear it dozens of times. Initially you dismissed it. But the repetition wore down skepticism. The claim started feeling plausible. Not because you fact-checked it, but because the repetition made it familiar enough to feel true. Think about political messaging. A talking point gets repeated across speeches, interviews, social media. The repetition is coordinated. The claim might be misleading, stripped of context, or outright false. But by the 100th exposure, it feels plausible. Even people who know better start second-guessing. I keep hearing this. Maybe there's something to it. There isn't. There's just repetition doing the work evidence should do. Or health misinformation. A false cure gets promoted repeatedly. Different sources, same claim. Each exposure makes it feel more credible. Not because new evidence emerged, but because the claim became familiar. The repetition created plausibility. People start trying the cure not because they verified its effectiveness, but because they heard about it enough times to feel like it might work. The effect compounds across sources. You hear the claim from one person, then another, then a third. Each source feels like independent confirmation. But they're all repeating the same claim from the same origin. The repetition created the illusion of multiple verifications. The plausibility increased not from evidence diversity, but from exposure frequency. Social media accelerates this. A claim circulates. You see it in your feed multiple times. Different people sharing it. Each appearance registers. The repetition happens passively. You're not seeking the claim out. It's seeking you out through the network. The passive exposure accumulates. The claim becomes plausible through ambient repetition. And the mechanism affects both true and false claims equally. A true claim repeated becomes more believable. A false claim repeated becomes more believable. Repetition doesn't discriminate. It just processes. The brain's fluency system doesn't check accuracy. It registers frequency. And frequency translates to plausibility regardless of whether the claim deserves it. The defense is awareness. Recognizing that repetition creates plausibility helps, but it doesn't fully protect. The effect operates below conscious evaluation. You can know that repetition doesn't equal truth and still feel the pull of familiarity. The claim feels plausible even when you're aware it shouldn't. The repetition did its work. The plausibility registered before critical thinking engaged. Ingroup rumor trust. A rumor circulates. Source unclear. Evidence absent. But it came from someone in your group. A friend, a colleague, a community member. That origin makes it different. You don't dismiss it immediately. You don't demand proof. The rumor came from inside. Inside means trust. The verification standard drops. Not because you consciously decided to lower it, but because in-group sources get credibility that out-group sources have to earn. In-group rumor trust is the phenomenon where people believe unverified claims more readily when they come from their own social group. The rumor doesn't need better evidence when it's from an in-group member. It needs less evidence because group membership signals reliability. The trust isn't about the claim's validity. It's about the source's identity. The mechanism is social identity. Your group is part of who you are. Questioning claims from the group feels like questioning the group itself. That creates discomfort. Accepting the claim preserves group cohesion. The acceptance isn't about truth-seeking. It's about belonging. The rumor gets trusted because doubting it might mean distancing from people you're connected to. Watch how this plays in close-knit communities. A rumor starts. Did you hear about? The rumor spreads through trusted networks. Family, friends, coworkers. Each person trusts the person who told them. The rumor compounds trust at each step. By the time it's made several passes through the network, it feels established. Nobody verified it. But everyone in the group believes it because everyone in the group is passing it along. Think about political tribes. A rumor emerges about the opposing side. The rumor aligns with your group's beliefs about them. Someone in your political network shares it. You trust them. Their trust makes you trust the rumor. You share it. Your network trusts you. The rumor spreads through mutual trust. Verification never happens. The in-group connection was the verification, or workplace gossip. A rumor about a colleague. It comes from someone you work with closely. You trust their judgment. The rumor aligns with what you've heard before. You accept it. Pass it along. The next person trusts you. They accept it. The rumor spreads through chains of in-group trust. By the time it's circulated, it's treated as confirmed. The confirmation was social, not factual. The trust is asymmetric. A rumor from an outgroup source faces skepticism. Who said that? What's their agenda? The standards are high. But a rumor from an in-group source faces acceptance. If they're saying it, there's probably something to it. The standards are low. The differential treatment isn't conscious bias. It's automatic preferencing of in-group information. Online communities amplify this. You're part of a group with shared identity, interests, politics. Rumors circulate within the group. You trust the group. The trust extends to the information the group shares. Outgroup sources are dismissed as biased, unreliable, agenda-driven. In-group sources are accepted as trying to inform, protect, or enlighten. The rumor gets different treatment based purely on who's sharing it. The danger is the bubble. If everyone you trust is part of the same in-group, and the in-group circulates rumors without verification, you end up believing things that aren't true. Not because you're gullible, but because the people you trust are repeating them. The in-group trust made verification feel unnecessary. Why check if your people are already saying it's true? And the trust creates resistance to correction. If an outgroup source debunks the rumor, that's not correction. That's the opposition trying to cover up. The in-group trust is stronger than the outgroup evidence. You'll defend the rumor not because you verified it, but because doubting it means doubting your group. And group loyalty often beats factual accuracy. Status gossip. They're rising. New promotion, new project, new visibility. And almost immediately the talk starts. Not celebration. Analysis. I wonder who they know. I heard they took credit for someone else's work. They're good at positioning themselves. The gossip isn't about what they did. It's about how they got there. And the implication is always the same: they didn't earn it the way you would have. Status gossip is talk about how people gain, maintain, or lose social position. It's not neutral observation. It's competitive assessment disguised as conversation. The gossip evaluates whether someone's status is legitimate, whether they deserve what they have, whether they're a threat. The evaluation happens behind their back, shaping how others perceive their position before they even interact. The function is social positioning. When you gossip about someone's status, you're not just talking about them. You're establishing where you stand relative to them. Questioning their legitimacy elevates your position. Acknowledging their achievement might lower yours. The gossip becomes a tool for managing hierarchy, through narrative rather than direct competition. Watch how this operates when someone gets promoted. Colleagues gossip. Did you hear? The tone isn't congratulatory. It's investigative. I didn't see that coming. I guess they impressed the right people. The gossip subtly undermines. It suggests the promotion wasn't purely merit-based. The person didn't just succeed. They navigated, manipulated, or got lucky. The narrative preserves the gossiper's self-image. If the promotion was political, then not getting it yourself isn't a failure. Think about how status gossip targets women and minorities differently. A woman rises. She's slept her way up. A man rises. He's well connected. Both involve relationships, but the gossip assigns different moral weight. The woman's status gets sexualized. The man's gets normalized. The gossip doesn't just question legitimacy. It enforces who's allowed to have status and through what means. Or consider new money versus old money dynamics. Someone becomes wealthy quickly. Status gossip questions it. Where did that money come from? The implication is illegitimacy. Old wealth doesn't face the same scrutiny. The gossip polices boundaries. It decides whose status is acceptable and whose is suspect. The determination isn't about the money itself. It's about who's entitled to have it. The gossip also manages perceived threats. Someone's status is rising fast. They're getting attention, opportunities, influence. Status gossip activates. They're getting too big for their position. They're overreaching. The gossip doesn't wait for the person to actually threaten anyone. The potential is enough. The talk preemptively undermines, slowing their rise through reputation damage before they can consolidate power. And the mechanism is self-protective. By gossiping about others' status, you signal you're paying attention to hierarchy, that you understand the game, that you're a player worth including in future opportunities. The gossip isn't passive observation. It's active participation in status competition. You're not just talking about the hierarchy. You're trying to position yourself within it through the very act of gossiping. Moral entrepreneurship. Someone identifies a problem. Maybe real, maybe exaggerated, maybe manufactured. But they don't just point it out. They build a crusade. They frame it as urgent, existential, a threat to values, to children, to society itself. They recruit others. They demand action. They position themselves as the moral authority fighting the good fight. The cause becomes their platform, and the platform becomes their power. Moral entrepreneurship is the process where individuals or groups create and promote moral rules or campaigns, often to gain influence, status, or resources. The entrepreneur isn't just concerned about the issue. They're invested in being seen as the leader of the concern. The moral crusade serves their interests as much as it serves the stated cause. The pattern is recognizable. Identify or create a moral threat. Amplify it through dramatic framing. Position yourself as the solution. Recruit followers. Use the movement to gain visibility, authority, legitimacy. The entrepreneurship isn't about discovering genuine harm. It's about constructing a narrative where harm exists, and you're the one equipped to fight it. Think about how this plays in social movements. Someone takes up a cause. Legitimate grievances exist. But the entrepreneur doesn't just advocate. They monopolize. They position themselves as the voice, the leader, the authority. Challenges to their framing get dismissed. Alternative approaches get attacked. The cause becomes inseparable from the entrepreneur. Supporting the cause means supporting them. Criticizing them becomes criticizing the cause. Or moral panics around content. An entrepreneur identifies media as harmful. Maybe violent video games, maybe music, maybe books. They campaign. Get media coverage. Testify to legislators. Write books. The campaign elevates them. Expert status. Speaking fees. Influence. The harm might be minimal or non-existent. But the crusade built a career. The moral entrepreneurship wasn't about protecting people. It was about building a platform on the appearance of protection. Watch how entrepreneurs use moral language strategically. Not just "this is bad," but "this is evil." Not "this should change," but "this is destroying our children." The escalation isn't proportional to the harm. It's calibrated to maximize alarm, which maximizes attention, which maximizes the entrepreneur's visibility. The moral intensity is a marketing strategy. The recruitment is about creating in groups. The entrepreneur defines who cares about this issue and who doesn't. Care means join the movement. Don't care means you're complicit. The binary forces alignment. You're either with the crusade or against the values it claims to defend. The entrepreneur built a following not through persuasion, but through moral pressure. And once established, the entrepreneur has incentive to maintain the problem. If the issue resolves, the platform collapses. So threats get perpetually rediscovered. New angles emerge. The crusade never ends because ending it would mean losing relevance. The moral entrepreneurship requires permanent crisis to sustain itself. The mechanism isn't inherently malicious. Some moral entrepreneurs genuinely care. But the structure creates perverse incentives. Your status depends on the problem existing. Your influence depends on being seen as fighting it. The cause becomes entangled with self-interest. And self-interest quietly shapes which problems get amplified, which solutions get promoted, and who gets to be the hero. Folk devil construction. They're the problem. Not the only problem, but the visible one. The one everyone can point to. The example of what's wrong. They're not individuals with context and complexity. They're representatives of a threat. Folk devils. Simplified, exaggerated, scapegoated. And once constructed, they're almost impossible to deconstruct. Folk devil construction is the process where a person or group gets labeled as a threat to social values, then becomes the focus of disproportionate concern and punishment. The construction isn't about accurate assessment. It's about creating a symbol. The symbol makes the complex problem simple. And simple problems feel solvable in ways complex ones don't. The process starts with selection. A group or behavior gets identified. It's usually already marginal, already lacking power to defend itself. The selection targets the vulnerable. The targeting is strategic. They can't fight back effectively. Media picks up the story. Authorities express concern. The group gets framed not as people engaging in behavior, but as embodiments of social decay. Think about how this played with moral panics. Youth subcultures, musical genres, gaming communities. Each wave identifies a folk devil. The framing is consistent. They're corrupting children. They're promoting violence. They're destroying values. The reality is kids engaging with culture. But the construction makes them monsters. The folk devil becomes the explanation for every related social problem, even when no causal link exists. Or immigrant communities. Economic anxiety exists. Jobs feel scarce. The folk devil construction targets immigrants. They're taking jobs, draining resources, threatening safety. The construction simplifies. The real causes might be automation, policy, economic shifts. But those are abstract, hard to grasp. The folk devil is concrete. The person you can point to and say, that's why things are bad. Watch how the construction amplifies. Initial concern leads to media coverage. Coverage leads to more concern. Authorities respond. The response validates the concern. More coverage. More response. The cycle builds. By the time it peaks, the folk devil has been constructed as a genuine societal threat. The threat was manufactured through the construction process, but it feels real because the reaction was real. The construction serves functions. It creates unity. Everyone agrees the folk devil is the problem. The agreement creates cohesion. It deflects. Real systemic issues get ignored while attention focuses on the folk devil. It validates authority. Leaders can demonstrate action by cracking down on the folk devil. The construction isn't just about the targeted group. It's about what the targeting accomplishes for everyone else. and the deconstruction is nearly impossible. Once someone's labeled a folk devil, defending them looks like defending the threat. The label sticks. Years later, even after the panic fades, the association remains. The folk devil was constructed in public, loudly, with institutional backing. The deconstruction happens quietly, if at all, without the same amplification. The construction 1. Panic narrative simplification. The situation is complex. Multiple causes, uncertain outcomes, distributed responsibility. But panic doesn't do complexity. Panic needs a clear story. Who's at fault? What the danger is? What needs to happen? So the narrative simplifies. Nuance gets stripped. Context disappears. What remains is a story simple enough to fuel immediate action, regardless of whether that action addresses the actual problem. Panic narrative simplification is the reduction of complex situations into simplified stories during crisis. The simplification happens because panic creates urgency, and urgency demands clarity. But the clarity achieved isn't accurate clarity. It's emotional clarity. A story that makes people feel like they understand what's happening, even when that understanding is false. The process is rapid. An event occurs. Initial information is incomplete. But the demand for explanation is immediate. Narratives emerge. The ones that spread fastest aren't the most accurate. They're the simplest, the most emotionally resonant, the easiest to understand. Complexity requires thought. Panic doesn't allow time for thought. So, complexity gets discarded in favor of narratives that can be grasped instantly. Think about how this operates during disasters. Something goes wrong. The public demands to know why. The real answer involves system failures, multiple decisions, historical factors, chance. That answer doesn't satisfy. It feels evasive. The simplified narrative identifies a villain. One person, one group, one decision. The villain made it happen. The narrative is false, but it's satisfying. It gives the panic somewhere to direct itself. Or health scares. A disease emerges. Transmission is complex. Risk factors are multiple. Public health response requires nuanced messaging. But panic simplifies. The narrative becomes, this group is dangerous. This behavior will kill you. This is the cure. The simplification might be counterproductive. It might misdirect resources. But it spreads because it's simple enough to hold in mind while panicking. Watch how simplification operates in financial panics. Markets crash. The causes are systemic. Interconnected failures, policy decisions, global trends. But the panic narrative simplifies. Greedy bankers. Government incompetence. Foreign manipulation. The simplification assigns blame cleanly. The actual causes are diffuse, making them unsatisfying as explanations. The simplified version provides targets. Targets make the panic feel actionable. The mechanism is cognitive offload. Complexity is expensive. It requires holding multiple ideas in mind simultaneously, weighing probabilities, tolerating uncertainty. Panic already maxes out cognitive capacity. There's no room for complexity. The simplified narrative offloads the burden. You don't have to think through the situation. The narrative thought for you. Just accept it and act. And the simplification becomes entrenched. The panic passes. The simplified narrative remains. It becomes the remembered version. The everyone knows this is what happened story. Attempts to reintroduce complexity face resistance. The simplified version is already established, already understood, already shared widely. Complexity feels like revisionism. The simplification won the narrative war during the panic, and that victory becomes permanent. Attention hijack via rumor. A rumor drops. Shocking, urgent, scandalous. Within minutes, it's everywhere. Conversations halt. Feeds refresh. The topic dominates. Not because anyone verified it. Because the rumor grabbed attention and won't let go. Everything else fades. The rumor isn't just spreading. It's hijacking collective focus, redirecting mental resources, monopolizing the discourse. And while everyone's looking at the rumor, Other things, possibly more important things, go unnoticed. Attention hijack via rumor is when unverified claims capture and hold collective attention, displacing other topics regardless of their relative importance. The rumor doesn't need to be true. It needs to be attention-grabbing. And once attention locks on, inertia keeps it there. The hijack succeeds not through merit but through psychological capture. The mechanism exploits attention economics. Attention is finite. Whatever captures it first has advantage. A rumor optimized for attention grabs it immediately. Shocking claim. Celebrity involved. Moral outrage. Fear trigger. The optimization isn't about accuracy. It's about neural hijacking. The rumor hits the attention centers hard. Everything else dims by comparison. Think about how this plays during important events. A policy debate is happening. Complex, significant, affects millions. Then a rumor drops about a public figure. Sex scandal, corruption allegation, shocking statement. The rumor hijacks attention. The policy debate disappears from feeds, from news coverage, from conversation. Not because it stopped mattering, but because the rumor captured the available attention. By the time the rumor is debunked, the policy moment has passed. Or corporate crisis. A company faces legitimate scrutiny. Labor practices, environmental damage, financial fraud. The scrutiny builds. Then a rumor emerges about the CEO. Personal scandal, unrelated to the corporate issues. The rumor hijacks attention. Media covers the scandal. The substantive issues get buried. The rumor served as distraction, whether intentionally or not. The attention hijack protected the company by redirecting focus to something less threatening. Watch how attention hijacks operate in politics. An investigation produces findings. The findings are detailed, documented, significant, but complicated. A rumor drops the same day. Simple, scandalous, easily shareable. The rumor hijacks attention. The findings get a fraction of the coverage. The hijack didn't refute the findings. It just made them invisible by claiming the available attention space. The hijack can be weaponized. If you want to bury a story, release a competing rumor. The rumor doesn't have to be related. It just has to be more attention-grabbing. The attention economy doesn't care about relevance. It cares about activation. The story that activates harder wins. Truth, importance, consequence, all secondary to the neurological pull. And once hijacked, attention is hard to redirect. The rumor dominates. Corrections don't recapture attention the same way. Debunking isn't as exciting as the initial claim. The hijack succeeds in its first moments. Everything after is cleanup. But cleanup never gets the same attention as the crime. The rumor might be false. Doesn't matter. It already did its work. It controlled what people thought about, talked about, cared about. The hijack won. Collective sensemaking failure. Everyone's trying to understand what just happened. Information is fragmentary, contradictory, incomplete. People turn to each other. What do you think this means? The group tries to make sense collectively. But instead of clarifying, the process amplifies confusion. Bad information gets validated. Speculation becomes fact. The group doesn't converge on understanding. It converges on a shared misunderstanding. The collective sense-making failed, but because it was collective, the failure feels like consensus. Collective sense-making failure occurs when groups trying to interpret ambiguous situations reinforce errors rather than correct them. The failure isn't individual. It's systemic. The group dynamics that should help people understand instead lead them toward shared confusion. And shared confusion feels more certain than individual doubt. The mechanism is social validation replacing evidence. When information is unclear, people look to others for cues. What are people saying? The others are doing the same thing. Everyone's looking at each other instead of at evidence. The group creates its own interpretation through social reinforcement. The interpretation might be completely wrong. But if enough people agree, it feels right. Think about how this happens during breaking news. An event occurs. Details are scarce. Speculation fills the gap. Someone suggests an explanation. Others elaborate. The group builds a narrative. The narrative spreads. People cite each other as sources. I'm hearing that. People are saying, the sensemaking is collective, but it's not fact-based. It's socially constructed. By the time real information arrives, the group's narrative is entrenched. Correcting it feels like contradicting the group, which most people avoid. Or organizational crisis. Something goes wrong. Employees try to make sense of it. Rumors circulate. I think it's because of X-Bor. That makes sense, I heard why. The group sensemaking converges on an explanation. The explanation is false. Management later clarifies what actually happened. The group resists. They've already made sense of it collectively. The shared narrative is more psychologically compelling than the official correction. The collective sensemaking failed, but the collective nature made the failure sticky. Watch how this operates in ambiguous social situations. A relationship ends. Friend groups try to make sense of it. They pool information. Each person adds their observation. The observations get woven into a narrative. It was obviously because the narrative becomes the group's understanding. But each individual piece of information was partial, possibly misinterpreted. The collective process amplified the errors instead of cancelling them out. The group made sense, but the sense was wrong. The failure is worse when the group is homogeneous. Everyone shares the same biases, same information sources, same interpretive frameworks. The sense-making doesn't get challenged. It gets reinforced. The group reaches consensus quickly. The consensus feels validating. Everyone agrees. But everyone's agreeing on a misinterpretation because nobody introduced a corrected perspective. Social media compounds this. During confusing events, people collectively make sense in real time. Threads build theories. Theories get refined through crowd input. The process looks like collaborative investigation. But it's collaborative speculation. The crowd isn't finding truth. It's constructing a narrative that feels coherent. The narrative spreads as if it's been verified, when really it's been crowd-sourced from confusion. And the failure creates false confidence. When you figure something out alone, doubt lingers. When a group figures it out together, doubt evaporates. The collective process feels like verification. We all came to the same conclusion, so it must be right. But collective convergence on error is still error. The sense-making failed. The group just made the failure feel certain. Behavioral contagion. One person pulls out their phone. Then another. Then a third. You weren't thinking about checking yours. But the sight of others looking at theirs creates a pull. You reach for your pocket. Not because you got a notification, but because the behavior spread. You caught it from watching. The contagion didn't need words or intention. Just visibility. Behavioral contagion is the spread of actions through observation and imitation. You see someone do something. Your brain processes it. Without conscious decision, you're more likely to do the same thing. The behavior moves from person to person like a virus, transmitted through attention rather than contact. The mechanism is automatic mimicry. Human brains are wired to mirror what they observe. See someone yawn, you yawn. See someone cross their arms, your arms shift. The mirroring happens below conscious awareness. It's not a choice. It's a neurological response. And in groups, the response compounds. One person's action becomes the group's action through rapid, unconscious copying. Think about how this operates in public spaces. Someone stands up on a crowded train. Others start standing, even though their stop isn't next. The behavior spread through observation, or a crowd watching a performer. One person starts clapping. The clapping spreads, not because everyone decided to applaud simultaneously, but because the first clap triggered mirroring in those nearby, whose clapping triggered more mirroring, until the entire space is applauding. or workplace behavior. One person starts working late. Others notice. Soon, more people are staying late. Not because workload increased, but because the behavior became visible. The visibility made it contagious. Staying late went from individual choice to group norm through behavioral contagion. Nobody announced the change. The behavior spread itself. Watch how this plays with consumer behavior. Someone in a store picks up a product, examines it, puts it in their cart. You're browsing the same aisle. Your attention goes to that product. You pick it up. The behavior spread. The first person's action made the product interesting through contagion, not through any information about the product itself. The contagion is stronger in uncertain situations. When you don't know how to behave, you look to others. Their behavior becomes your template. A group enters an unfamiliar setting. One person sits. Others sit. One person orders. Others order similarly. The behaviors spread because uncertainty made people default to imitation rather than independent choice. Social media visualizes this. Someone posts a type of content. It gets engagement. Others post similar content. The behavior spreads through the network, not through coordination, but through observation and mimicry. Each person saw the behavior work for someone else and copied it. The contagion shaped what people post, how they post when they post, all through unconscious imitation of visible success. And the spread creates norms without deliberation. The behavior that spreads becomes the behavior that's expected. Nobody voted on it. Nobody decided it should be standard. It just became standard through contagion. The group's behavior is determined not by collective choice, but by which behaviors happen to be visible and therefore catchable. Emotional contagion. The room feels tense. You don't know why, but your shoulders tighten. Your breathing shifts. Something's wrong. Then you realize nothing's happened to you. The tension isn't yours. You caught it from the atmosphere, from the faces around you, from the collective mood that spread through the space before you even understood what was happening. Emotional contagion is the transfer of feelings from person to person. You don't just observe someone else's emotion. You experience it. Their anxiety becomes your anxiety. Their excitement becomes yours. The transmission happens automatically through facial expressions, body language, tone of voice. Before you process what you're seeing, you're already feeling it. The mechanism bypasses conscious thought. Your brain reads emotional signals constantly. Facial muscles, posture, vocal pitch. The reading triggers mimicry. Your face mirrors theirs. The mimicry creates the feeling. You're not thinking, they look anxious, so I should feel anxious. Your face copied their expression. The expression generated the emotion in you. The contagion completed before conscious awareness engaged. Think about how this operates in groups. One person's stress radiates. The people nearby pick it up. Their stress radiates further. The emotion spreads through the room like a wave. Nobody announced they were stressed. Nobody explained why. The feeling simply moved from person to person until the collective mood shifted. The group is now stressed without most members knowing why. Or positive contagion. Someone laughs. Genuine full laugh. Others start smiling, then laughing. The laughter spreads. People who don't even know what the first person was laughing about are laughing. The emotion became contagious. The joy transmitted through sound and expression, creating joy in others without requiring understanding of the source. Watch how this plays in customer service. An employee is having a bad day. Their frustration leaks through their tone, their expression, their energy. The customer catches it. The customer's mood soars. The soared mood affects how they treat the next person they encounter. The emotional contagion started with one person and spread through a chain of interactions, each person transmitting the feeling they caught to the next. Or think about crowds. A few people start to panic. Their panic is visible, audible, physical. The people around them catch it. They start to panic. Their panic spreads to others. Soon, the entire crowd is panicking. The initial trigger might have been minor, misunderstood, or false. Doesn't matter. The emotion became contagious. The contagion created a collective state that exceeded the original cause. The contagion is stronger with people you're close to. Family, friends, coworkers. You're more attuned to their emotional signals. The mimicry is stronger. Their feelings transmit more easily. Spend time with an anxious person, you absorb anxiety. Spend time with someone calm, you absorb calm. The emotional contagion shapes your internal state based on whose emotions you're exposed to. And the mechanism doesn't distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate emotions. If the source emotion is justified, contagion spreads it. If the source emotion is baseless, contagion spreads it just as effectively. The brain's emotional mirroring doesn't fact-check. It just copies. The result is groups sharing feelings that may not match reality, but match each other. Information cascade. You're deciding where to eat. 2 restaurants side by side. One's empty. One has a few people inside. You choose the one with people, not because you researched their menace, because the presence of others signaled this is the right choice. They chose it. You followed. They might have followed someone else who followed someone else. The cascade built not from independent evaluation, but from each person copying the person before them. Information cascades happen when people ignore their own information and follow the choices of others. The cascade doesn't require the early choices to be correct. It just requires them to be visible. Once a few people move in one direction, that direction becomes the path everyone follows. Not because it's right, but because it's the path others chose. The psychology is rational on an individual level. You don't have perfect information. Others might know something you don't. Following their lead feels safer than deciding independently. The logic makes sense for each person. But when everyone's following everyone else, the cascade can lead the entire group wrong. Because nobody actually had good information. They were all following. Think about how this plays in financial markets. A few investors sell a stock. Other investors see the selling. They sell too. Not because they have new information about the company. Because the selling itself is information. Other people are selling, they must know something. More people sell. The selling becomes the signal. The cascade drives the price down. The original sellers might have been wrong. Doesn't matter. The cascade followed their lead anyway. Or hiring decisions. A candidate applies to multiple companies. One company makes an offer. Other companies see it. Suddenly they're more interested. Another company wants them, they must be good. More offers come in. The cascade made the candidate more valuable. Their actual qualifications didn't change. But the cascade created bidding competition based on the fact that someone else bid first. Watch how this operates in social situations. A group is deciding what to do. The first person suggests something. The second person agrees. The third person faces pressure. Everyone else is agreeing. Maybe they have doubts, but speaking up means going against the emerging consensus. They agree. The cascade builds. By the time it reaches the last person, the decision feels unanimous. But it started with one suggestion, and everyone else just followed. The cascade can override better information. Someone in the group might actually know that the chosen option is bad. But the cascade pressure is strong. Everyone else already agreed. Contradicting them means positioning yourself as the outlier. Most people don't. They follow the cascade even when they know it's wrong. The social cost of breaking the cascade exceeds the value of being right. Online, cascades are visible and rapid. A post gets early engagement. The engagement signals this is worth paying attention to. More people engage. The engagement snowballs. The cascade happens in minutes. Content that got lucky with early visibility rides the cascade to virality. Content that didn't, regardless of quality, gets buried. The cascade determines success based on initial momentum, not merit. And cascades create fragility. Because everyone's following everyone else, the group can shift direction just as quickly as it formed. A new signal appears. The cascade reverses. Everyone who was buying is now selling. Everyone who was agreeing is now disagreeing. The cascade didn't make people confident in the choice. It just made them confident everyone else was choosing it. When that changes, the cascade collapses. Social validation loop. You post something. No response. You question whether it was worth posting. You post something else. It gets likes, comments, shares. That felt good. You post more of the same. More engagement. The validation teaches you what to post. Soon, you're not posting what you want to say. You're posting what gets validated. The loop closed. The social response shaped the behavior. And the behavior now chases the response. The social validation loop is the cycle where social feedback reinforces behavior, which generates more feedback, which further reinforces the behavior. The loop doesn't care what the behavior is. It cares about the response. Whatever gets validated gets repeated. Whatever doesn't gets abandoned. The loop shapes you toward what others reward. The mechanism is operant conditioning at scale. Positive response feels good. Neurologically, chemically, psychologically. You want that feeling again. So you do more of what generated it. The loop doesn't require consciousness. It operates on the reward circuit. The behavior that gets rewarded becomes the behavior you default to. Think about how this shapes social media use. You post different types of content. Some get engagement. Some don't. The engaged content teaches you. This works. You do more of it. The loop tightens. Over time, your posting behavior converges on whatever gets the most validation, regardless of whether it's what you actually care about. The validation loop trained you. Or workplace dynamics. You contribute in meetings. Some contributions get acknowledged. Some get ignored. The acknowledged ones feel validating. You contribute more in that style. The loop shapes how you participate. Soon, you're not saying what you think is most important. You're saying what generates the validation response. The loop optimized your behavior for social reward, not for accuracy or value. Watch how this operates in relationships. You behave certain ways. Your partner responds positively to some, neutrally or negatively to others. The positive responses validate. You do more of what got validated, less of what didn't. The loop shapes the relationship. Both people are training each other through validation and withdrawal. The behaviors that survive are the ones that got validated, not necessarily the ones that are healthiest. The loop can optimize for the wrong thing. If validation comes from outrage, you generate more outrage. If validation comes from agreement, you agree more, even when you shouldn't. If validation comes from performance, you perform rather than being genuine. The loop doesn't judge what's being validated. It just reinforces whatever generates response. Online platforms engineer this deliberately. Likes, hearts, shares, comments. Each one is a validation signal. The signals train behavior. Users learn what generates validation and do more of it. The loop creates predictable behavior patterns. The platform doesn't need to tell users what to post. The validation loop shapes them into posting what the algorithm rewards. And the loop creates dependency. You start needing the validation. A post without engagement feels like failure. You check compulsively. Did anyone respond? The validation became the metric of worth. Not internal judgment, but external response. The loop made you dependent on others' feedback to feel okay about what you're doing. The escape is hard. Breaking the loop means posting despite lack of validation. Acting despite lack of reward. The break feels like deprivation because the reward circuit expects the hit. The loop trained you to need the response. Operating without it requires resisting the conditioning the loop created. Digital pile-on psychology. A post goes up, mild criticism. A few people agree. More join. The criticism intensifies. Each comment is harsher than the last. Soon, hundreds of people are attacking. Not because they all independently decided this person deserved it, but because the pile-on created its own momentum. Joining felt righteous. The collective fury validated individual participation. And the person at the center drowns under the weight of mass condemnation. Digital pile-on psychology is the phenomenon where online criticism escalates into disproportionate collective attack. One person's comment invites another. Each addition makes the next feel more justified. The group isn't carefully weighing the offense. They're participating in a collective punishment that feels socially sanctioned, because so many others are doing it. The mechanism is diffusion of responsibility plus moral licensing. In a crowd, individual accountability fades. I'm just one voice among hundreds. The participation feels less significant, but each person is making the same calculation. The result is hundreds of people each thinking their contribution is minor, collectively creating overwhelming attack. And the moral framing makes it feel justified. This person did something wrong. Attacking them isn't cruelty. It's accountability. Justice. The framing licenses behavior that would feel wrong in other contexts. You're not bullying. You're speaking truth to power, defending values, holding someone accountable. The moral frame transforms aggression into righteousness. Think about how pile-ons ignite. Someone makes a mistake, says something offensive, does something questionable. The first responses are critical. The criticism attracts attention. More people arrive. They see the criticism and add their own. Each wave is harsher. Early criticism was measured. Later criticism is vitriolic. The escalation happens because later arrivals match the intensity they see, then exceed it to stand out. Or how pile-ons target. The target might deserve criticism, but the scale of response rarely matches the scale of offense. Someone makes a bad joke. The pile-on treats it like a crime. The disproportionality comes from the pile-on dynamic, not from careful calibration of response to harm. The crowd's anger compounds, and compounded anger doesn't stay proportional. Watch how participation feels. You see the pile-on happening. Your initial instinct might be to stay out. But the collective condemnation is visible. Everyone's denouncing this person. Silence might look like endorsement of what they did. So you add your voice. Not from deep conviction, but from social pressure to be seen participating in the collective judgment. The pile-on recruited you. The participation also feels good. Moral outrage is satisfying. You're on the right side. You're standing up for what's right. The group validates you. Each like on your critical comment reinforces that you're part of the righteous majority. The pile-on doesn't just punish the target. It rewards participants with validation and belonging, and the pile-on rarely corrects itself. Once started, it has momentum. Even if new information emerges that contextualizes or contradicts the initial criticism, the pile-on continues. The crowd invested energy into condemning this person. Backing off now would mean admitting they participated in something unjust. Easier to maintain the condemnation than to face that possibility. The pile-on becomes self-sustaining. The damage is permanent. The target gets hundreds or thousands of hostile messages. Even if most participants forget about it quickly, the target experiences the aggregate. The pile-on dissolves for participants. For the target, it's archived, searchable, permanent. The collective punishment that felt minor to each participant was overwhelming to the person receiving it. Contagious uncertainty. Nobody knows what's happening. The information is incomplete, contradictory, unclear. But uncertainty doesn't stay isolated. You're uncertain, so you look to others. They're uncertain too. Their uncertainty makes you more uncertain. Your uncertainty makes them more uncertain. The feeling spreads, amplifying with each transmission until the group is paralyzed not by lack of information, but by contagious doubt about everything. Contagious uncertainty is the spread of doubt and hesitation through social networks. One person's uncertainty signals to others that there's reason to be uncertain. The signal transmits. Each person who catches it radiates it further. The uncertainty compounds until the collective can't make decisions, can't form consensus, can't move forward. The mechanism is social proof applied to doubt. If multiple people are uncertain, uncertainty seems like the appropriate response. The social validation reinforces the hesitation. You're not just uncertain because you don't know. You're uncertain because everyone else is uncertain, which confirms there's good reason to be. Think about how this operates during crisis. Information is scarce. People don't know what's happening or what to do. They look to each other. Do you know what's going on? No idea. The exchange doesn't just acknowledge uncertainty. It spreads it. Each, I don't know, makes the uncertainty feel more justified, more appropriate, more overwhelming. The contagion makes the group less capable of acting even as action becomes more necessary. Or organizational change. A restructure is announced. Details are vague. Employees are uncertain about their roles, their futures. They talk to each other. What do you think this means? I'm not sure. The uncertainty spreads through conversations. Each conversation amplifies it. Soon, the entire organization is frozen. Not because the change is necessarily bad, but because the contagious uncertainty made everyone too hesitant to move. Watch how this plays in decision-making. A group needs to choose. The first person expresses uncertainty. I'm not sure which option is best. The second person hears that and feels validated in their own uncertainty. They express it too. The uncertainty spreads around the table. By the end, everyone's uncertain. The group is paralyzed. The contagion made collective uncertainty greater than any individual's initial doubt. The uncertainty can be strategic. If you want to prevent action, seed uncertainty. Are we sure about this? The question doesn't need to be backed by specific concerns. Just raising doubt is enough. Others will pick it up. The uncertainty will spread. The group's confidence will erode. The action will stall. The contagion did the work the direct opposition couldn't. Social media accelerates this. A claim circulates. People express uncertainty. Is this real? I'm not sure. The uncertainty spreads through threads, through shares of the uncertain reactions. The uncertainty becomes the story. Not, here's what happened, but nobody knows what happened. The contagion made collective knowledge weaker than it should be given the available information. And the uncertainty creates risk aversion. When everyone's uncertain, proposing action feels dangerous. What if you're wrong? Better to wait, to see what others do, to let someone else go first. But everyone's making the same calculation. The result is collective inaction driven not by impossibility of action, but by contagious uncertainty that made action feel too risky for anyone to attempt.